Audio check, 3, 2, 1.
Sorry, just by way of information, we know it's 6 o'clock. We're just waiting for the recording to start, and then we will commence the meeting. Good evening and welcome. This is a meeting of the Planning Committee and I'm Councillor Martin Warnes, Chair of the Planning Committee, and I will be chairing the meeting tonight. To begin with, there are a few matters of housekeeping. Action in the event of an emergency. There are no practice alarms planned for this evening, so if an alarm sounds, please evacuate the Town Hall by going down the main staircase or the back staircase to the High Street and then to the car park behind the Town Hall in St Runwald Street. This meeting is being live streamed to the Council's YouTube page and will be available after the meeting. Please would speakers use microphones at all times and speak directly into the microphone, and would participants please mute the microphones when not speaking. So we will do the introductions of members of the committee and officers, and they will introduce themselves, starting from my left.
Good evening, everyone. Councillor Sam McCarthy, representing Shrub End Ward and Deputy Chair of the panel.
Councillor Robert Davidson, Merseyside and Playfleet Ward.
Councillor Mark Gocher, Castle Ward.
Chris Pearson, Labour Councillor for Beerchurch, substituting this evening. Councillor Jackie McLean from Marksdale Lair Ward.
Councillor Catherine Spindler from the Saints.
Councillor Tracy Arnold, Stanway Ward.
Councillor Jeremy Hagan, Stanway Ward, substituting for Councillor Mannion.
Councillor Mike Lilly, Old Heath High from Row Hedge, subbing for Councillor Sam McLean.
Councillor Cole Powling, Mersey and Pyfleet Ward, subbing for Councillor Lee Tate.
Benji Firth, Urban Design Officer.
Nadine Calder, Principal Planning Officer.
Karen Sire, Joint Head of Planning.
Robert Carmichael, Democratic Services Officer. And just to note, Chair, we have Martin Mason from Essex County Council on Zoom with us tonight.
Thank you. And Councillor Pearson, could you confirm who you're substituting for?
I understood I was substituting for Councillor Sam McLean, but it must be Katie Ripplingham. Kaylee.
So you're substituting for Councillor Kaylee Rippingdale. Right. Members of the committee may use electronic devices to access their meeting papers, and visitors are welcome to use mobile phones and other devices, including cameras. Please use them discreetly. Set them to silent and do not use voice or camera functions. We will have a break at 7:30 and every 90 minutes afterwards. However, we have a number of contributions this evening, so it's my proposal that if we get through all the contributions before 7:30, we take an early break, and then we can then go on to the deliberations before us. Thank you. There are toilets on every floor in the building and an induction loop in this room. Whilst determination of a planning application is not a quasi-judicial process, unlike certain licensing functions carried out by the authority, it is a formal administrative process involving the application of national and local policies, reference to legislation and case law, as well as rules of procedure, rights of appeal, and an expectation that people will act reasonably and fairly. All involved in these decisions should remember that the possibility that an aggrieved party may seek judicial review and or complain to the Ombudsman on grounds of maladministration or a breach of the authority's code. The apologies for absence we have are Councillor McLean, Councillor Rippingale, Councillor Mannion and Councillor Tate. Subs have already been confirmed, so we move on to item 3, declarations of interest. Are there any? Can't see any. Okay, so we move on to item 4, urgent items. There are no urgent items. So we move on to have your say, item 5. If anyone has a petition they wish to present to me on any of the items, or in this case, item on the agenda this evening, please do so now. Item 6, minutes of the meeting of the 26th of September 2024 are before the committee for confirmation. Are there any points of accuracy? Okay, there aren't any, so can I have a proposer and seconder? Proposed by Councillor Davidson, seconded by Councillor Sam McCarthy, and we'll then go to the vote. All those in favour?
That's carried, Chair.
Thank you. So I'm now going to give a preamble to what we are doing this evening. Yeah, so I want to give my reasons to you and the public for expanding the speaking arrangements this evening. The committee meeting this evening is a single item agenda, and we are considering a major application of 200 houses within the context of a scheduled monument of international importance. Councillor Cox has been deeply involved in the development and has engaged with the civic society and its members to ensure that their voices are heard. The allowing of additional speakers is in an equitable way whereby supporters and objectors will be allowed the same amount of time to speak, will not set a precedent going forward, as the committee are looking at a unique site with unique issues based around the Roman circus, the remainder of which may be considered at further committees in the future, where again each proposal will be assessed on its planning merits. The application is not without significant interest, as 60 objectors have been made, and although planning is not a popularity contest, it provides a litmus test of the controversial nature of the site, and as such, on this occasion, I have allowed 2 speakers to address the committee for and against the proposal. So, the application before us is Agro Development on Flagstaff Road, Colchester, CO2 7SR. It's the redevelopment of the site to provide 203 residential units and approximately 160 square metres of commercial floor space with associated access, public open space, landscaping, car and cycle parking and associated infrastructure. The officer's recommendation is approval subject to Section 106 agreement. The presenting officer will be Nadine Calder, and those speaking against will be Edward Barrett and John Burton MBE, and those speaking for will be Carl Glossop and Duncan Hawkins. Visiting councillors are Councillor Rippingale in person, Councillor McLean's statement, Councillor Cox statement, Councillor Corey in person, Councillor Dundas statement, Councillor Ellis statement and Councillor Naylor in person. So, councillors and members of the public and officers, there is great interest in this application before us and numerous people want to contribute. So I would ask that those registered to speak be prepared to keep within the allotted time to speak and be prepared for me to interrupt them if they do not. Officers, I would ask that you be as succinct as is reasonably possible when presenting the application. We've got a lot of business to go through tonight. Councillors, we are here tonight to make a decision based on the information before us. In doing so, may I ask that you listen to all contributions made this evening and consider all the information put before you prior to doing so. Should you decide to agree to the officer's recommendation before you, I will need a proposer and seconder and an indication as to whether you're accepting option A or option B on the paper. Should you decide to refuse the application, then you must be clear about the reasons for doing so and state what those material considerations are, so officers can advise you on whether the drop procedure would be advisable in this situation. If a proposal is made to refuse an application, then we would need to ascertain reasons for refusal before seeking advice from Karen on the drop procedure. Members must explain their reasons, as I've just said, for the refusal using specific policies and references to material planning considerations. They're all listed in your agenda papers. If a member does not provide enough information for a reason for refusal, the chair can ask them to expand on their thoughts. The chair has the power in the drop procedure to defer the item to seek a report from the joint heads of planning should there be concern over significant risk with the decision being made. It is not for the officers to come up with reasons for refusal, but members to distill the reasons after they have been conveyed into a workable decision notice. Should you decide to defer this application, then it should be based on the need for information you don't have and which you need to be able to have to make a decision at a later date. So if a proposal to defer the item is made, then as I've said, we'll need to ascertain the reasons for deferring before seeking advice from Karen. A deferral should not be used to redesign the scheme. A deferral should be used to request further information if that information is required for the committee to make a decision. It is inappropriate for a decision to be deferred if the issue can be conditioned or delegated for further consideration, unless the committee need to have sight of this before making a decision. So I'm going to go on to the have your say item, and before I do that, I'm going to ask Nadine if you would kindly present.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. As you've just heard, we are here to look at an application on the former Aberrow site in Flagstaff Road for redevelopment of the site to provide 203 residential units with some commercial floor space and associated access, public open space, landscaping and hard and soft infrastructure. Here is the location plan, which shows the site outlined in red and its surrounding context. The site has been allocated for residential-led development in the local plan, with site allocation policy SC1 being the most relevant. This states that the 4.26 hectare site will provide 3.8 hectares of residential development and 0.46 hectares of open space, and that development on that site will be supported where it meets the Aberrow Site Development Brief, a document that was adopted by this council in 2021 and now forms a supplementary planning document. This slide shows an extract from that development brief, which shows the heritage value of the site. The red area outlines the residential site allocation, with the blue area showing the scheduled and ancient monument, including a 10-metre buffer zone within which no built development is allowed. Within the site, 3 buildings have been identified to be of historic or architectural significance. They are the ones highlighted in brown, and they include the former infirmary stables, which is now a Grade 2 listed building, the carpenters and telecommunications shop, and the Roman circus house. All of these buildings are retained as part of the proposed scheme, with the infirmary stables and carpenters and telecommunications shop restored and used for commercial purposes, and the Roman circus house, which includes the Roman Circus Museum at the ground floor and lies outside of the application site, being the subject of improvements secured under a Section 106 improvement should planning permission, Section 106 agreement should planning permission for this development be granted. The site also lies within the Garrison Conservation Area, and shown in purple are listed buildings surrounding the site. Before I move on to the details of the proposed developments, I will show you some photos of the site. Some members have had the benefit of a site visit earlier in the week. Other members may be familiar with the site due to its location and heritage value. So this photo shows the existing access into the site from Flagstaff Road and existing buildings at the entrance, with this photo showing further buildings at the entrance as well. We are now standing within the site, looking back at the entrance, and again seeing existing buildings on the site, all of which are proposed to be demolished as part of this proposal. This photo shows the existing buildings along the northern boundary of the site, some of which form part of the boundary wall, also known as the folly. The building in the front is what is referred to as the store in the development brief, with the two-storey building in the centre being the carpenters and telecommunications shop, closer photo of which is shown here. And as mentioned previously, this two-storey building is proposed to be preserved, restored and used for commercial purposes as part of the proposal. The same applies for the infirmary stables, which is shown here, and is the newly listed building, a Grade 2. Moving around the site, this photo is taken looking west towards residential development within Roman Circus Walk, and looking south towards Roman Circus House, which houses the Roman Circus Visitor Centre, as mentioned previously, the building just about being visible behind this tree. This photo shows the northern boundary of the site, which is the public footpath, and the folly wall, which is a locally listed building. Final two photos show the existing public footpath which runs through the site from the folly and Walsingham Road to Flagstaff Road, and here from the other side from Flagstaff Road to Walsingham Road. It is also worth noting the bollards on the right side of the picture, which prohibit vehicular access from Flagstaff Road to Flagstaff Road from Walsingham Road and vice versa. These are to remain. Moving on to the development, as set out before, it includes the demolition of all buildings except the infirmary stables and the carpenters and telecommunications shop, and the provision of 203 dwellings, commercial use and associated public open space, landscaping, car and cycle parking. The scheme comprises of flats and houses and is made up of 31 one-bed apartments, 44 two-bed apartments, 15 two-bed houses, 87 three-bed houses and 26 four-bed houses. Vehicular, pedestrian and cycle access will be provided off Flagstaff Road in the east of the site, with further pedestrian and cycle access points being provided from Roman Circus Walk to the west, 2 access points from public footpath to the north, the diverter public footpath from Walsingham Road along the northern boundary, and from Circular Road north in the south. The layout of the site has been amended throughout the application process and after detailed discussions with consultees and relevant specialists. A particular change worth highlighting, which has enhanced the scheme, is the repositioning of the block of flats in the western corner of the site. These two historic images from the site show the historic layout of the former military buildings, highlighted in red. And this extract showing how this element has tried to be replicated as accurately as possible in the scheme before you today. There we go. It is also worth noting that the Roman Circus, which was found in 2005, is currently located under existing buildings. Their demolition and the provision of a 10-metre buffer zone with no built development would allow for the Roman Circus to be better revealed. This has already been partially achieved by the neighbouring development to the east, and the following extract from the site layout shows how the circus will be presented within the application site boundaries, achieving consistency with the neighbouring site. Yep. This slide shows the parking strategy. Due to the highly sustainable location of the site, a reduced parking provision was encouraged, and this has been achieved to some degree. The parking consists of a mixture of on-plot parking through carports and allocated and unallocated parking in rear parking courts. A parking permit scheme would cover the site to avoid any unauthorised parking, and as demonstrated by the yellow dots on this plan, all units are provided with electric vehicle charging points. Here we see the proposed storey heights plan with the majority of the site and crucially those buildings which address a heritage asset being of 3-storey height and the remainder being of 2-storey with some limited single-storey buildings. This drawing shows you an overview of the proposed house types. Due to the sensitive area of the site and the need to provide a higher standard of architecture, All house types are bespoke. However, whilst there are up to 21 different house types and 6 different elevations for the apartment blocks, some of the differences are very subtle. So the following drawings are an extract of some of the house types where there's only very small differences. For example, this house type block 1 and house type block 2, which are mainly provided in the northern elevation of the northern part of the site. We've got house type block 5, which on the bottom plan is highlighted where it is. House type block 7, which are the houses that front Walsingham Road. The next one being the units that would address Flagstaff Road. Again, some very small differences between these house types, block 11 and 17. The blocks that would front onto the Roman Circus, which have some enhanced detailing. And some dwellings shown again with a continuous frontage. Then one of the smaller units within the site, and a typical elevation of the apartment blocks, 5 of which are quite similar, and 1 which is a little bit different. This is the existing infirmary stables, which, as mentioned previously, is proposed to be retained and restored for commercial purposes. And the same for the carpenters and communication shops, existing on the left and proposed on the right. And then we've got the existing site wall, which is the Folly Wall, which is the locally listed building. This shows it as existing. This shows it as proposed with the buildings that are demolished, and the wall itself will be restored and repaired. This being the view from the Folly public footpath, and then these being the elevations from within the site. I think it's the other way around, apologies. And then finally we've got some street scene drawings where a mixture of the house types are shown on the same drawing. To conclude this presentation, the proposal comprises the residential development allocated site in the development plan. The proposals have been the subject of extensive discussions with internal and external stakeholders and have been amended a number of times in response to feedback that has been received. For the reasons set out in detail in the officer report, the final scheme that is before members today has been found to comply with the relevant local plan policies, and a compliance statement with the criteria of the Abro site development brief has been put to members via the amendment sheet. Members will be aware that the application has been the subject of a viability assessment, setting out that no affordable housing provision on the site can be made. This has been independently reviewed on behalf of the council, and it was concluded that the development in fact is not viable. With the proposal being at the lower end of the allocation as agreed in the development brief, the applicant was asked to provide a viability review for a larger scheme. A subsequent review has again, for a scheme of 310 units, was provided and again independently reviewed. However, this has also been found to be unviable. Nevertheless, officers have succeeded in securing a small provision of affordable housing and, crucially, a mix of housing for which there is a dire need in this area as part of this application. The development meets the exceptions as set out in the local plan policies, and any planning permissioner would also be subject to a viability mechanism review, which could secure additional affordable housing provision should the viability of the site improve during the course of construction. The amendment sheet also confirms that there is no longer a holding objection from Place Services Ecology, with 5 additional conditions being suggested. The applicants have also since suggested an amendment to condition 3 relating to archaeology to provide an archaeological outreach programme, which would include the establishment of a viewing platforms or viewpoints so that the archaeological investigation can be safely viewed by members of the public from the boundaries of the site. Archaeological information boards attached to the development hoarding to be updated on a fortnightly basis with plans, photographs and texts detailing the progress of the investigations. the 2 public open days to be organised where archaeologists conduct a safe tour of the investigations on a weekend day so that members of the public can see and observe the full nature of the investigation as they progress, and a programme of outreach lectures which will be provided, including 1 public outreach exercise at a local public venue and the offer of outreach lectures to local schools in the vicinity of the archaeological investigations. Members are today asked to consider the very special site-specific circumstances which have led to a favourable recommendation by your officers for this scheme. Members have also been provided with 2 options regarding financial contributions and obligations, one of which is a policy-compliant provision of all necessary contributions, plus a reduced provision of affordable housing, with the other being the reallocation of some of the contributions towards additional affordable housing units. If there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them after the speakers. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Nadine. So we're going to move on to the public speakers. May I remind the speakers that they have up to 3 minutes. That's the public speakers, and the bell will go after 2. And visiting councillors, you have up to 5 minutes, and the bell will go after 4. Could I say to members of the committee, once we go to actual discussion, could you previously, before that, indicate to my vice chair whether you wish to speak, and he will keep a list. We are going to keep a note of how many times people are speaking so we can give the opportunity to those that haven't had a say to have a say before we bring back people for a second and third time. In that way we can get full and proper discussion. So we go to members of the public, and may I call John Burton MBE to speak in objection to the proposal. Thank you. You press the red button and the time starts.
I speak on behalf of Colchester Civic Society, asking you to refuse this application or defer to consider our and other people's concerns. The late Alistair Day's planning brief was supported by us and adopted by this committee. We support the Council's commitment to enhance, not just respect, the Roman Circus as a key visitor attraction. On the 31st of July 2023, we opposed approving this application. Continual changes since have not altered our opinion, as the application still ignores the City Council's design brief. The Secretary of State recently listed buildings on the site warrants a review of the design brief. HE's second letter on the planning portal advises you this application is a missed opportunity. Please consider this advice by ensuring Ambrose site is relevant to the past and the city's future. Wealth-generating regional shopping is declining in this city, as in others. Alternatives are required to generate our city's income. Colchester has an opportunity with its wealth of national history to replace the declining shoppers with wealth-generating tourists. The applicant's layout of housing and style can be anywhere, pays no discernible reference or respect for the site's history, where soldiers left to fight and die for our freedom, a critical part of Colchester's history. Essex Fire Service report assumes that the dwellings meet building regulations and therefore do not object. They did not assess the buildings. Private sector housing, in your bundle, did advise there are critical issues, stating egress in the case of fire in several house types is through high-risk areas, stating fire safety does not avoid category 1 or high 2 hazards. Also, the ventilation in house types H and I need redesign, and heating radiators sitting in high category 2 hazards, they indicate they may need to take enforcement action to ensure properties meet requirements. Remember Grenville Tower. 296 car spaces, less than your normal requirements, are provided on site. Where do the surplus cars go? 296 cars, together with delivery vans, dust carts, motorbikes, enter and exit the site at one point only on a route between 2 halves of the school. The Highway Authority did not appear to have been asked to consider that. The headmaster has told us of his concerns for his pupils, staff and parents who use the route throughout the school day. He has not been formally consulted. Please consult him. He's very worried. Ambrose site sold without planning approval, finding a financially viable development we suspect has led to the deviation from the design brief. Accepting that with an approval could encourage other developers to ignore your requirements in the future. We want to strengthen your position, acknowledge your design brief, have safe buildings and school routes in a city that attracts wealth-generating tourists. We also want to meet the housing needs for those in dire need. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Okay, so I now call Edward Barton to speak in Barrett, my apologies. Edward Barrett to speak in objection to the proposal.
I don't have an elaborate presentation like John, but I have a fair bit to say. I'm Dr. Edward Barrett, in fact. I've lived in the area for 8 years and I know it very well. I looked at the transport assessment in particular, and I didn't actually kind of recognise the lived experience of living in that area of Colchester. I didn't recognise the congestion every day as the place is used as a drop-off point for children. I didn't recognise the congestion on our road. I didn't recognise other users being acknowledged in the work that had been done. So I was extremely concerned by that. As a result of that, I contacted a traffic engineer who, in confidence, gave me some advice about what was going on the site and the lack of information. He talked about modelling and inadequacy in the modelling processes. He talked about the narrow carriageway and the difficulties that that would cause traffic moving in both directions, especially larger vehicles, from vans to HGVs to fire service appliances, amongst other things. He talked about the consequences of the narrow carriageway for the likelihood of vehicles straying onto the pavement and interfering with the children and the kids that and the families that I know use that road very extensively. So what I'm saying there, I suppose, is that certain planning conditions inherent in the local plan are threatened by this particular development, in particular DM21, I believe, and remembering also it's not just the parents and the kids that you have to think about. You also have to think about the users of that route that are encouraged because it's part of the orbital, which is, I think, called ENV3. That's another one of your conditions in in the local plan that's already established. Now, this road, Flagstaff Road, and most of my objections relate to the use of that site in particular, is part of a green link, And what I'm suggesting is, in fact, the green aspects of that link are likely to be decimated by this particular plan. This is because I think we've seen some information earlier about the trees on the site, and there's actually some documentation in the brief presented by the officers which suggests that something like 3 or a limited number of trees will be affected. By my estimate, that's completely unrealistic. It's in fact 17, because there are trees, and if you look at the developers' information, if you look in particular at the site layout plan, you'll see what is actually intended. There are 11 trees, in fact it's 18 in total I think that are affected and that would be felled. There are 11 on the public green space area, and there are 7 on the side of the road that faces onto Napier Road, so that's 18 in total. All of those trees are covered by TPOs. This is a conservation area, and as I said, it's part of a green link. So there are questions, very serious questions, about the impact of that on biodiversity and the devastating effect that it would have on nature in the area, quite clearly.
Thank you, Edward. I call Carl Glossop to speak in support of the proposal. Again, the red light's on, so when you start speaking, your time will begin.
Good evening, councillors, and thank you for the opportunity to speak tonight. Countryside Partnerships are excited to bring forward another housing site in the city, which aims to transform a brownfield site in the immediate vicinity of the city centre. As the starting point for decision making, the site is allocated in the adopted local plan with an accompanying development brief which have strongly influenced our proposals. The provision of 203 new homes on the site are of a wide mix of tenure and includes 87 3-bedroom houses and 26 4-bedroom houses, which reflects the most critical need for the city. We would like to thank the wide range of consultees who have worked positively and collaboratively with the Countryside Partnerships team to get us to this stage, including Colchester City Council, Historic England, Essex Highways and local councillors since early 2022. It's worth noting that as part of this engagement process, a concept drawing was presented to the applicant team showing local councillors' wider ambitions for the Roman Circus site. This concept influenced significant changes to the scheme design. We worked with Historic England to change the buffer zone around the circus so that homes could sit exactly parallel to it. Parking was moved to a rear parking court so that the buildings would frame the edge of the circus. The buildings themselves were redesigned with additional architectural detailing in the form of stone archways and brick banding in order to reflect the former Roman circus design. The Council's wider ambitions for the Roman circus site are to be commended, but these proposals can only be determined within the context of being a step in the process of achieving those ambitions, albeit we believe the proposals represent a high-quality step in the right direction. In relation to engagement, it's worth mentioning I met with the head of the local primary school on site. Their only concern was in relation to construction traffic during the time of the build, and Countryside has agreed with the council to apply conditions to ensure construction movements are not taking place during school drop-off and pick-up times. The Abro site is an excellent, highly accessible location, close to key local services and facilities, all of which will reduce environmental impact and promote sustainability. A transport assessment that has assessed impact of the proposals on local roads and junctions has been prepared in agreement with Essex Highways, who have also recommended approval. Heritage and design have been critical to shaping our proposals, and we will be transforming and improving existing heritage assets on the site, and most importantly, opening the site and its rich history up for everyone in Colchester to enjoy. And therefore, overall, we believe this is an opportunity for Colchester to deliver much needed homes on brownfield land, deliver on a local plan allocation, and deliver enhancements to the city's heritage offer. We recommend that the committee grasps this opportunity and resolves to grant permission. Thank you.
Thank you, Carl. I call Duncan Hawkins to speak in support of the proposal.
Following on from Carl's comments, very extensive consultation has been carried out with Historic England, both on the Built Heritage team and on the archaeological team, and also with Colchester City Council's archaeological advisor. And all of that consultation has been fed directly into the scheme, as Carl has suggested. I'm working principally as archaeologist on the project on behalf of the developer, and the development offers a fantastic opportunity to further our understanding of the Roman circus, which is internationally important and is designated as a scheduled monument. The circus itself is currently completely sealed within the site under existing buildings. And in fact, we have literally just completed the archaeological trial trenching of the site, including a number of trenches in the scheduled area, which were done with scheduled monument consent. And we know that the concrete slab of the existing buildings is actually sitting directly over the remains of the seating of the circus. So we've got a huge opportunity here to unpick these buildings from the circus, plan the circus and consolidate it, and then seal it appropriately beneath the ground to ensure preservation in situ. We can then use the actual plans of the circus itself to memorialise the circus in the same way that's been done for the Taylor Wimpey development to the east, using the same materials. And this can then be laid out on the ground as a heritage resource and possible tourist destination. We can deliver museum quality information panels associated with the circus, and these can be linked into other heritage assets around the site, so that the circus house, museum, but also the wider historic environment such as Colchester Castle Museum. The circus is not existing in isolation, and it's important to realise that one of the big difficulties of the site is that there is an enormous amount of archaeology on it, and we've identified nearly 2 hectares of Roman cemetery to the north of the circus, and it appears that the cemetery actually lapped right up to the edges of the circus, both to the north, west and south. And the archaeological excavations will offer a huge opportunity to put the circus in context and understand more fully how the circus worked, because it appears that it's actually quite a significant site for religious purposes, given the proximity of the cemeteries, as well as just the entertainment of the circus itself. Those excavations can all be open to the public through the medium of viewing platforms, viewing points through the hoarding of the development, and we can undertake site tours, because one of the things that's happened in our
Thank you, Duncan. I'll take that as your last word and move on to the councillors. And can I call Councillor Rippingale? You have 5 minutes, and when you follow the rules.
Thank you, Chair and colleagues, for the opportunity to speak today. I'd like to begin by addressing the viability of the site, which has been a reoccurring issue on this development. Whilst viability has often been cited as a barrier with this site, it's also important to note the council itself conducted a viability assessment, which indicated a reasonable level that could be paid for the site. So why is it the developer was unable to reach a similar conclusion and bid a reasonable amount for the site? This brings me to the key point of its neighbouring site, the Quadriga site, a site that is owned by the group who also owns Countryside. The development group in question had struggled to complete the development of the historic retained buildings on that estate, which still remain abandoned to this day. For several years, myself, Pam and Sam have advocated tirelessly for those buildings to be put into a positive use, such as providing much needed social housing. CBH even completed a viability assessment to explore the potential. Yet, here we are, still asking, what security do we have that the historic buildings on this site will be developed now? With the downturn in commercial property, what guarantees do we have that they won't allow these buildings to deteriorate further like we've seen before? Moreover, the Vistry Group has not developed the other buildings on the Quadriga estate for commercial use, so why these ones? Instead of letting our heritage fall into disrepair, I personally believe the horse infirmary should be given back to the community. We would turn it into a space that celebrates our rich military history and significance to Colchester. It would be a great use of this site, reconnecting the community with its past. Now I must ask, what is the point of us all have set in all of those meetings about the local plan if we're not going to adhere to it? We've set a clear target of 30% social housing. We know the need in our community, and yet it seems that this is the first thing to be cut when developers face challenges. Given the ever-increasing numbers on our local housing registers, it is outrageous that we are willing to sacrifice affordable housing commitments, especially when the commitment on this development is a mere 7.4% of the total development. And to do this for a development group that has failed to deliver in the past. It is unacceptable. Furthermore, the use of Section 106 money as a substitute for real tangible commitments to affordable housing does not demonstrate a developer willing to support the community that they are building in. I am not willing to support a proposal that is not sympathetic to the needs of our residents or that proposes good design in keeping with the historical context of the site. I also was concerned about the lack of the comprehensive traffic assessment. Mr. Barrett had emailed me with his points, and I won't go over them again as he has illustrated them so well, but this is a key route for schools, and I am concerned that the head has not been consulted on this traffic movement. I will say there are positives where I feel like I have been listened to when consulted. I welcome the additional lighting and improvements to the access to the folly which councillors insisted the developer included in our meetings. This is an excellent step towards improving the active travel route and making it safer for our residents. As for the Roman Circus, I won't delve too deeply into this. I do believe we should be making more of this historical asset. Contributions towards the visitor centre, which is adjacent to the development, would go a long way in attracting tourism to our wonderful city. I'll leave this with Pam and her expertise to expand on further in her statement. Given these concerns, I think it's only right that we push for a deferral of decision. We need more time to discuss with the developer how they plan to address these issues and work alongside the community of Colchester and in particular Newtown and Christchurch. I find it deeply troubling the developer only contacted me on the morning of the 16th of October despite not being in touch from our initial meetings, with a 2-page fact sheet. This is not the level of engagement I would expect or deserve. Let me be clear, I'm not against the development of this site. It offers great opportunity to make use of the brownfield site in an accessible location, but I do believe we owe it to the people of Colchester to ensure that this development is done right, with the necessary commitments to social housing, proper preservation of our historical assets, and full integration into the community of Newtown and Christchurch. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. Thank you. So I now ask Robert to read out Councillor Sam McLean's statement.
Thank you, Chair. If you bear with me one moment, I'll just get it up and ready to read. Dear esteemed members of the Planning Committee, I regret that I cannot join the panel today due to my predetermined view on the matter, which might inadvertently affect the committee's reputation. I'm requesting the deferral of this application. The current plan fails to comply with the planning guidance outlined in the local plan. Why have a local plan if it's not going to be adhered to? The proposed affordable housing, social housing contributions to social amenities is significantly below what the local plan demands. It is unacceptable and frankly insulting to every councillor. Furthermore, the design does not reflect the architecture of the surrounding area, showing a lack of respect for the existing communities. The plans propose weak footpaths that don't connect to the city centre, and there are no contributions to public transport, failing to mitigate the inevitable automobile traffic increase this development will cause. Most importantly, the development does not enhance the potential of the only Roman circus in Northern Europe. The Roman circus would have been the Ben-Hur-style sports centre in Camulodunum. I apologise if I've said that incorrectly. Yet it remains an unrealised asset that should be a premier tourist destination in the east of England. This planning application does not do enough to change this. A housing development in this area must highlight this historical asset. The developer must be ambitious, transforming it into an internationally recognised flagship development rather than this generic, uninspired cookie-cutter plan. Take pride in our city, honour our historical assets and potential. Defer this application, please. Councillor Sam McLean.
Thank you, Robert. I'll now ask Robert again whether he could read out Councillor Cox's statement.
Thank you, Chair. During my maiden speech to Parliament last week and in follow-up letters to two Secretaries of State this week, I referred to Colchester's unique heritage. Colchester was Britain's first Roman city and is home to the only known Roman circus in the whole of Northern Europe. Designated as a scheduled ancient monument, the site is of exceptional national significance. We have barely scratched the surface of its local potential. The circus extends across land owned by different bodies. Its below-ground foundations were discovered by archaeologists in 2004 during the redevelopment of former garrison buildings. Since then, Colchester City Council has worked with Historic England and other stakeholders to develop principles to guide the future development of the site and surrounding areas. Colchester's recently adopted City Centre Master Plan, together with much-needed improvements to St Botolph's and Southway, offer a valuable opportunity to reconnect the circus for residents, tourists and posterity future with our historic city centre. As Colchester's new MP and as ward councillor for the area that includes both the circus and historic garrison, I am certain that we must seize and not squander the opportunity offered to us at the moment. Members of the Planning Committee will be aware of my concerns, which were submitted on the 18th of March 2024 about planning applications 231297. In my view, and that of my fellow ward councillors, this application is not yet compliant with Colchester City Council's planning policies for the site. Article 1, Part 1, Abro Site Development Brief ASDB, and Part 2, Roman Circus Management Plan 2020 to 2025. These two policies clearly show that it is the intention in time of Colchester City Council that the Roman Circus site should be presented as a single archaeological monument, and that any non-heritage structures that visually fragment the circus should be removed. It follows, therefore, no new structures that fragment the circuit should be introduced further. While plans submitted by the developers, application 231297, take some steps towards the more effective presentation of the circus footprint and scale, these measures are not sufficient to prevent the serious further fragmentation of the circus site. They thus compromise the council's intention to make the circus into a national visitor attraction that it has repeatedly stated that it wants to be. This is a major concern. Further, we have a vital opportunity with the redevelopment of the Abro site and simultaneous work on St Botolph's and Southway to repair the broken connection between the circus and the city centre through new walking routes. The road/housing layout submitted by the developers does not sufficiently encourage this and must be revised. Notably, with the proposed layout does not respect the indicative layout as set out in ASDB and reinforced in ASDB paragraph 4.23. which clearly suggests a street layout that is much more directly aligned to the Roman circus, cavea, its terrace stands, and crucially much better reflects the vital military and Victorian character of the surrounding buildings, street layout and housing. If we do not embrace our own planning policies and stated ambitions for this area, we'll be sleepwalking into giving a green light to a standard modern housing development that bears no relation to its far from standard and nationally significant historic surroundings. I would like to ask the members of the Planning Committee to defer their decision on application 231297. I ask this not on the basis of the concerns I have just set out, but on the basis that, as a ward councillor, I have not received formal updates on the application since April 2024. As I understand it, 3 pertinent developments have occurred since that time. Number 1, the developers have sought to renegotiate the viability of the site with a potential impact on levels of affordable housing and cultural/community contributions. 2, the developers have firmed up their plans for community/cultural contributions, but have not discussed these with councillors. 3, an alternative vision for the celebration and presentation of our unique Roman circus and Victorian garrison recently presented to the Colchester Civic Society has generated significant public interest and support. As a council, we need to take more time to give these matters the proper consideration that they deserve. This is why I seek a deferral of this item. Thank you.
Thank you, Robert. I now call Councillor Corey to speak. You know the rules, Mark, and we'll wait for you to turn on the red button.
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Nice to be here again this evening. This application is of utmost importance, and that's why I'm here. It's not my ward, it's not my cabinet responsibility, but I believe it's so important that we as a council have to have a view and to guide members. This application, in my view, on planning guidelines is not policy compliant. It does not deliver the affordable housing allocation that we want to see in our local plan, SP4, meeting the housing need. Neither does it meet section 2 of the local plan, DM8. So we are not delivering 30% affordable housing through this. 7% is not good enough. So there's number 1 reason to refuse this application. Secondly, there is poor quality design here, and the landscape and place setting, SP7 and section 2 DM15, I believe is not good enough. It does not represent the SPD layout. It shows this kind of design, which would be great for the 1990s, but it's not good enough to replicate the historic location. It is not at all improving the landscape and what is there, in my opinion. That is pretty poor. So I think we've got a much better opportunity here to shape this place, to echo the history of this place, and to do much more. I shouldn't talk about what could be done, so I should talk more about this application. But what has been put forward by Francis Terry and others could be a much better aspiration for this site. Instead, I feel these designs are the lowest common denominator. They do not represent the good design in the area. For example, the Taylor Wimpey refurbishment to the east and where the circular part of the Roman Circus has been well looked after. I won't repeat the points made by Councillor Rippingau about viability, but that is not an issue for us to deal with. We should not compromise on our policies due to viability and paying over the odds for a site. I also won't talk about the localised factors because I'm not a ward member who appreciates all of those factors. But looking through the design, house type 15 came up and just was, again, another bland example that really detracts from the site and improving it. I think we can do so much better. For me, councillors were brave years ago in protecting the Roman Circus from the Sergeant's Mess application, and again with the Taylor Wimpey site. I'm afraid I disagree with Countryside. This is not a step in the right direction, it's a step in the wrong direction. This is a brownfield site that could take more density, it is sustainable, and we could see higher density delivering on affordable housing, delivering better viability for the developer, and delivering on investment into the Roman Circus. So we're not meant to discuss other options, but we could improve density, make it go higher, which is rare for me to come and say at a planning committee, put more housing on there, put affordable housing on there, and celebrate our history much better. I don't know which bill I'm meant to have, but so from the chair's, from what the chair said earlier, I was going to say to the committee that we should defer and improve this application, but actually from what the chair said, that would be the wrong advice. I think we should reject this application based on planning policy grounds that it does not meet, primarily affordable housing allocation. But I've sent to members my comments about this application. We cannot keep compromising on Colchester's heritage. This is about celebrating what we have there from 2,000 years ago. Instead of putting in a compromise now that would last 200 years or more, we can do so much better here. Overall, I think policy terms, you can reject it. I don't think that this layout echoes any of the history. I don't think we are doing the best we can here. There's not enough public gathering space in this proposal either. You could have community units. You could have a lot more if you looked at this application in a much better way. I'll stop there because I don't want to suggest what should happen, but I would say at worst defer, at best reject this application. We can do a lot better. We can increase density. We can deliver affordable homes, and we can deliver a scheme that invests and celebrates our history. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Corey, and I now ask Robert to read out Councillor Dunder's statement.
Thank you, Chair. Dear Committee, my apologies for not attending in person, but unfortunately this meeting clashes with the Team Colchester board meeting this evening. I wanted to just make the committee members aware of the history of this site and in particular the City Council's involvement with it, as I am not sure all members are aware. When the site came up for sale in 2021, the Council looked at bidding to buy it. This was both because at the time it was looking for new development opportunities itself and also as a way to ensure the supplementary planning document which had been created by the much missed Alistair Day was respected together with the archaeological and historical nature of the site. After much consideration as leader of the council at the time with the Cabinet's support, I took the decision to bid for the site. This was after considerable investigation of the constraints and impact on viability. The council bid a sensible amount which it considered would mean it was both commercially viable and could respect full SPD. In short, everyone was aware of the challenges around it and there weren't actually a huge number of unknowns. Additionally, a sensible contingency was put into the business plan to account for any. I think Councillor Dundas may have forgotten to finish that sentence, but I'll continue with the next. It ends like that, Chair. Just for reference, just to plan to account for any.
Yep.
Unfortunately, the Council's bid was not accepted due to others bidding higher amounts. It must be emphasised that all those who bid were aware of the issues and had the opportunity to be involved in the pre-planning process. The council was aware of the constraints, as were the other bidders, but the other bidders decided to bid more whilst in full possession of the facts. The view at the time was that it would be unacceptable for any eventual developer to deviate from the SPD. The SPD was prescriptive for good reason. The council bid a fair price for the site, which could deliver the full SPD and still be viable, and one of the reasons for bidding was that should any other purchaser come back at a future date and argue they couldn't deliver the full SPD, the answer would be bluntly, tough, it is only your own fault for bidding the wrong amount. We knew what we were doing, it is your own fault if you didn't. I do of course appreciate that planning law may take a different view on how viability is calculated, and that cash amount paid is not treated in what a layperson would consider a logical way. This, as it often does, leaves the committee in an invidious position where it knows what it is being presented with is wrong, but it may struggle to find reasons to refuse it in planning law. I do not envy your task this evening, but it is important to know that the issues around the site were well known by the purchaser at the time they made their bid decision, and the SPD, which was the last work of one of our top planning officers before his far too young passing, was all well known to everyone involved. Councillor Paul Dundas.
Thank you, Robert. We're now going to give Robert's voice a break, as he's had to read out lots of statements. We're going to ask his colleague Owen whether he could read out Councillor Ellis's statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. A statement from Councillor Andrew Ellis. Thank you for allowing me to address you this evening, albeit not in person, as I am unfortunately engaged in another council meeting elsewhere. I do not like to interfere with planning applications in other councillors' wards. However, as a previous portfolio holder for planning and housing who was involved with this site early in the process, I felt it important to share my opinion with you. I'm certain that other speakers this evening will have something to say about buildings and the scheme design and layout. I want to concentrate on the affordable housing element and scheme viability. Chairman, committee members, it is nothing short of outrageous that planning permission should even be considered for a scheme that relies on viability concerns to justify failing to meet critical policy requirements, especially the affordable housing requirement, at a time when affordable housing is more crucial than ever. I know that Councillor Dundas has made a submission this evening, so please forgive my reiterating that, due to the importance of this site, the City Council made a bid that was fair and reasonable. This bid was made with full understanding of the constraints, including likely archaeological issues and the policy burdens that came with developing this site. We bid for the site at a price that reflected these factors because we knew what was at stake, not just for us, but for the community. As part of the scheme, affordable housing was always going to be a critical element in addressing the housing crisis, and any deviation from the policy requirement is a step backwards. The SPD, Supplementary Planning Document, is prescriptive for good reason. This site is not just any piece of land, it holds significant potential to demonstrate the positive outcomes that can arise from thoughtful and strategic planning on an incredibly sensitive historic site. However, that potential can just as easily be squandered if the planning authority allows developers to cut corners under the guise of viability issues. It is essential to emphasise that the City Council's bid was commensurate with the full need to meet all the SPD requirements, including affordable housing. This was no accident. Developers bidding for this site were given a clear and transparent guide as to what would be acceptable. If the City Council could submit a bid with the understanding that these requirements would be fulfilled, why should any other developer be granted leniency? It sets a dangerous precedent when viability, essentially the developer's profit margin, is used as an excuse to sidestep obligations that are in place to serve the public good. The affordable housing requirement should never be up for negotiation. At a time when housing need has seldom been greater, it is the bare minimum that we, as a community, can expect from any development on this site. Allowing developers to deviate from this requirement undermines the integrity of the planning process and the very purpose of the SPD. Let me be clear, it would be hugely disappointing should the issue of scheme viability be accepted as a reason to deviate from the SPD. This site is an opportunity to showcase the power of good planning, and any development that does not meet these standards would, in my humble opinion, be an unacceptable failure. I trust committee will do its utmost within planning law to ensure that what is delivered on this important site meets the brief in full. Colchester deserves nothing less. Statement ends.
Thank you, Owen. I'll call our last speaker, Councillor Naylor, if you could come to the mic. And obviously you know the rules, and when the red light comes on, your time will start.
Good evening, committee, and thank you for allowing me to address you. I am also not a ward councillor for this application, and I too feel that this application is of significant importance, and if I didn't even live in Colchester, I think I might have gotten a train to get here to make this point. Colchester is a special place, we all know that, but even more special because of the quality and the nature of the ruins that are here from another time. We have a duty to look after those. They are not ours to just determine what should happen to them and allow them to be built on. I did actually feel quite cross earlier this being talked about as a brownfield site. I'm sure that's the technical term, but I think it doesn't do justice to what we're dealing with here tonight. These are nationally important ruins. I did a quick Google check, seeing what other nationally important ruins are. Hadrian's Wall. There's beautiful amphitheatres, there's fantastic museum in preserving part of the London Wall. It's an amazing experience. Let's be ambitious about our duty as custodians of these special ruins and not just pay lip service. I was also quite cross to hear that the supplementary planning document has just been given lip service to. There are just so many reasons why this scheme before you tonight is inadequate. Others have talked about the policy reasons in terms of viability, in terms of affordable housing. I concur with all of those points. I was very particular. I want to endorse Councillor Dundas, Councillor Ellis and Councillor Corey's comments, all of the comments they made. I can't stress how much this is an exceptional site of national importance, and no developer should cynically come along, if that is the case, overbid and then expect to be given a free pass to dumb it down just to turn a profit and put up some very plain, inappropriate housing and forever lose the opportunity which Colchester residents deserve to have this highlighted and made the most of and become a national attraction, because this is a scheme, these are ruins of a national importance. I can't overstate that. And if we look at the reasons why we should consider, rather you should consider not proceeding with this, we do talk about impact on conservation area. I would argue this doesn't really touch the sides when we talk about something of national importance. I'm going to leave it there because you've all done your reading, you've heard fantastic speakers. I just want to add my voice to those of the other councillors and all the other experienced members of the public here who've given up their time to say, let's not accept a second-class solution for a first-class site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Naylor. Okay, so in a minute I'm going to move on to ask the officers to reply. If you need more than 15 minutes to reply, take it. Don't feel constrained by the 7:30 break time, okay? Could I say to members, it would be helpful if you could start to indicate to Sam whether you want to speak, so when we come back from the break, we can get down to this. For those that are a bit slow on the uptake, we've already had one. Okay. Okay, so Nadine and Karen, if you could respond, speak in whatever order you feel is appropriate.
Thank you, Chair. I might not go in order because there's a lot of duplication and I might just jump around a little bit. A few things to clarify. One comment was made about cars, there not being enough car parking spaces. This is a highly sustainable location where a car-free or reduced parking provision should be encouraged. It's in walking distance to the town centre, walking distance to the bus station and to the train station. If we can't accept a lower car parking provision here, then we can't accept it anywhere. You would have heard that in terms of vans and HGVs going down that road, Blackstaff Road, you should remember that this is a former industrial site, which would have generated HGV traffic. And in terms of the construction traffic, we have agreed with the applicant as they indicated that as part of a construction management plan, we could limit the hours to there not being any construction traffic during school drop-off and pick-up, just to be on the safe side. There was mention of 18 trees being felled. That's incorrect, it's 10, which I know is still a significant number, given that we should not fell any trees as part of a development, but there is going to be a significant amount of replacement tree planting, including the provision of the historic tree line along Flagstaff Road. So there will be an enhancement in terms of biodiversity, and there will be replacement tree planting in excess of what is being felled, and there will be some benefit to this tree line being re-established. We do fully understand the concerns that have been raised with the neighbouring site about historic buildings that have been left alone. And the only thing I can say to that, having not been included in that scheme, we must learn from our mistakes. And we have provided a condition that requires a scheme to be submitted to the council within 6 months of permission being granted as to how the two buildings that are to be remained will be restored, with a timetable and just general information how they're going to be used. And it was also the indication to put this in the Section 106 agreement, just to have that extra security. None of this was included in the previous application, which is why we are where we are with that. Consultations have been raised a couple of times. I can see from our system we have consulted the school. There was mentioned that they haven't been consulted. Only have they been consulted, they have also submitted a letter, not of objection but of general concern, raising comments about construction traffic, which I believe we can address via condition. We have also had very detailed discussions with Councillor Cox from the start of this application until April, like she said. We have sent a consultation email to all councillors, all neighbours, once the final scheme was received. That was in May, and we haven't heard anything since. But the changes compared to the previous scheme were subtle. So we have received her objection in March, I believe, and we just took that these comments still stand, but there has been consultation beyond that date. And then I personally would like to move on to the three most important matters, one of which is viability. As a starting point, the price that was paid for the site does not matter. It is the benchmark land value that matters for viability. We cannot take into account what they have paid for the site, even if we all think it was too much. That does not factor into viability. The fact that the council has bid for the site is also not relevant, and it may also be a conflicting interest. The site has been independently reviewed, and it has been found to not be viable. Viability is a planning matter. We have had recent appeal decisions where even the planning inspector sets out that where up-to-date policies have set out the contributions expected from development, planning applications that comply with them should be assumed to be viable. It is up to the applicant to demonstrate whether particular circumstances justify the need for viability assessment at the application stage. Crucially for us here, the weight to be given to a viability assessment is a matter for the decision maker, having regard to all the circumstances in the case. So we have received that viability assessment and we believe we have given it the consideration it needs. The development brief has some limitations, one of which states at paragraph 1.5, the brief does not provide a full assessment of all the potential site constraints. It does, however, provide a framework for the site's redevelopment whilst identifying areas that will benefit from further investigation. And at paragraph 3.11, the site itself has not been the subject of previous archaeological investigation. There is high potential for encountering previously unknown, important below-ground archaeological remains across the site, which could not only affect the layout of any development proposals, but could also be very costly and time-consuming to deal with. That is one factor which has happened. A lot more archaeological remains have been found, and that has put the price up for the applicant. Moving on from that, staying on viability but going into affordable housing, the fact that a limited amount of affordable housing is provided is not in itself a conflict with policy. Local Plan 2, Section 2, Policy DM8, Affordable Housing, states for sites where an alternative level of affordable housing is proposed below the target, it will need to be supported with evidence in the form of a viability appraisal. In exceptional circumstances where high development costs undermine the viability of housing delivery, developers will be expected to demonstrate an alternative affordable housing provision. So again, it is not a conflict with policy DM8 per se, because exceptional circumstances have been put forward. It was mentioned that in order to improve viability and affordable housing, a higher density scheme should be provided. The development brief states that between 171 and 304 units on the site can be provided. We are at 203, which is at the lower end. There's a mix of apartments and houses. Because it's at the lower end, we've asked the applicant to submit a viability review based on a higher density scheme. So they've submitted a viability review for a 310 unit scheme, which, unlike the current scheme before you, is made up mainly of flats. So there's differences there in terms of build cost because you will go higher up, sale values and things like that. That again was found to be unviable. If you were to go higher up, the development brief says 4 stories. If you were to go higher density, you would be in conflict with the development brief, but higher stories. If you had more units, you would have more cars. You would have potential overlooking. You could have other issues. So we can't just say go higher density because that will bring different constraints. And also it doesn't automatically mean there will be more affordable housing because again it has been found to be unviable. The SPD layout is exactly what it says. It's an indicative layout. It actually, I might read. Just one more point on affordable housing. The development brief in planning obligations section 5.4 actually says the precise detail will be negotiated between future developer, applicant and the council. So again, you haven't got that direct conflict where it says it must provide 30% affordable housing. While that was the aim, it was open to negotiation in that sense. The indicative layout, paragraph 4.23, the following illustrative plan shows how previously outlined key principles might, as an example, suitably translate to a site layout, subject to further considerations of issues and opportunities. It lays down a design quality benchmark for considering future developer proposals, even if designs creatively differ in translation and or in response to future emerging factors. We're missing that direct conflict again. It's indicative. It shows what kind of land use could go where. So we have provided that compliance statement with the development brief, and we have not identified any direct conflict with adopted policy, which is the starting point for your assessment. Any artist impressions that may have been provided and may be seen as ambitious, that word that has been used, is not something that can be provided on this site. The development itself would not fragment the Roman Circus, because that is already fragmented by North Circular Road, Flagstaff Road, Circular Road East, the buildings that survive from the Victorian military use. And if we were to be more ambitious in terms of the artist impression that has been put forward, we would need to dig up roads, demolish private houses. There is land ownership issues, because there's not one land ownership. So it is simply impossible to provide that ambition. And I think, if I could, in terms of design, if I could just refer to Benji, the Urban Design Officer, please.
Evening members. So just in terms of the design, we normally start at sort of the layout stage, so it's worth noting that the site is a relatively awkward shape. Also has levels variance across the site of a good couple of metres, and changing those levels is quite tricky given what's underneath the ground. So we start by looking at the constraints and the opportunities of the site and looking at how to treat certain edges. So the development brief sets out the principle of having a strong frontage along the Roman Circus and along Flagstaff Road. We've got the folly, which we need to protect and preserve. And then we've looked to echo some of the historic buildings on the site, which isn't required by the development brief, but it was a nice nod to the history of the site, we thought. Once you've done that, you've sort of got limited space within the site. You've got the back-to-back distances, the gardens that are needed for those units that you're already on the site. You're just trying to create perimeter blocks and find where you can place parking for everything. And in that sense, the layout sort of grows and evolves on its own. With regard to the connections from the site, there's obviously quite good links to the town centre already along Flagstaff Road and Butt Road, either side of the site. And then to the north of the site, you've got the folly, which actually acts as a bit of a barrier at the moment. And the layout's proposed to punch through that folly and give more access. There's also a pretty direct route from the St John's Green area straight through to the Roman Circus, which was seen as a key link, linking that back to the city centre. And sort of any opportunity there is for pedestrian connections have tried to be embraced.
Sorry, Benji, if I could just ask if you could pull the microphone closer to you.
Sorry.
I am a hearing aid wearer, and my hearing aid is amplifying everything, including what is in the street.
Sorry about that. So officers are of the mind that actually the permeability and the connections provided by the site are actually relatively good. Then moving on to the built form, I mean the house type seeks to replicate sort of Victorian terraces and townhouses, which is consistent with what has been done across the rest of the garrison developments. In terms of detailing, well, in terms of form and scale, they're relatively similar to just to the southwest in the Roman Circus Walk area. And in terms of detailing, they take detailing from existing buildings on the site and sort of the Garland Road, Stable Road area with the stonework and the brickwork detailing. So again, it's officers' opinion that it actually responds to the context of the site. So overall, we think an acceptable standard of design is achieved. And I just echo Nadine's point about the density. I mean, we've looked at a scheme of high density on the site. We're already at 1-for-1 parking provision. Once you increase the density, that is more parking to find in this area. And you've got to consider if we're happy for car free. I mean, I would push car free, but we often get a lot of pushback from that. That also affects the viability in terms of the marketability of the units. So I'd just echo that high density isn't always as simple as it seems.
Thank you, Chair. I don't think Benji and Nadine have left me a great deal left to say, in all honesty. I think all I would add is, in terms of viability these days is very much focused on plan making. And going into the emerging local plan, there'll be much more of an expectation that sites and the plan overall is viable. In 2017, when we submitted our adopted plan, it was rather more light touch. There were some cases, court cases in 2018, 2019, which generated changes to the planning practice guidance and the National Planning Policy Framework itself, and we'll have to reflect that now. Looking back, however, at that 2017 viability report that we did publish, it does acknowledge that there would be some schemes, particularly flatted schemes, where it wouldn't be possible to achieve 30% affordable housing. And it recognised that site circumstances may change over time, so those sites might become more viable, but there might be other changes which make them less viable. And the current NPPF and guidance does stress that in order to put forward a scheme on and suggest that it's not viable in order to provide all policy compliant requirements, then there does have to be circumstances outlined, and that's for the developer to do. But what you might like to consider are things like the contamination, the build quality expected on this site, changes in terms of biodiversity net gain, changes in market values, build costs, that sort of thing. So certainly some of these sites over time, when we've dealt with regeneration, redevelopment of sites, they do tend to be the sites. I'm thinking back in the days when we were delivering a lot of sites down at the Hive, for example, they tend to come with more complex development costs. The same could be said for the Essex County Hospital site as well. So that's something to bear in mind. Nadine's outlined what the affordable housing policy says and what the local plan says about needing to take account of viability in certain circumstances. We've heard several calls tonight to defer and to refuse this application. What I would ask members to consider, if you are minded to go down either of those routes, is to clearly articulate the reasons, because although there's been a lot of heartfelt speeches tonight, some of those reasons haven't come out particularly well in terms of reasons. So please do in your statements after the break. That would be extremely useful. Thank you.
Thank you, officers. In a moment, I will invite you to take a break, but I will, in a moment, also ask Robert to give some words of advice. Before I do that, I would remind you that this is a formal administrative process, and as earlier, I ask you to listen to all the contributions that we will make this evening and consider all the information before you come to any decisions within your mind. I'll ask Robert to give you words of advice.
Thank you, Chair. Just before we go to the break, I'd just ask members to ensure that they do not discuss the application whilst we are in the break. Thank you, Chair.
And we will go for break. Thank you. Can we be back? Okay, members, welcome back. Had a good break. Just to let you know that Irene, our historic buildings officer, has joined us online, who is available to give you advice if you need it. So we are going to move to the discussion. I want it to be a full and proper discussion. If we get to 9 o'clock and we have to move standing orders, then so be it. But if you could think about your questions when you ask them, and make sure that you get the point in you want first time, because we will be looking to let everyone speak before we let people come back in again. Okay, so my vice chair tells me that the first councillor to get their dibs in was Councillor Lilly.
Thank you very much. I might be finished by 9. Right. I think first off we're saying that, and this would be where I stand really. If I remember being at school, Charles Lucas, not being a great pupil, but if this was my report, the teacher who hated me would come along and put 2 big red lines for it and say, "Must do better, see me afterwards." And I think it sums up this planned application. It must be better. It must be better for Colchester. For years now, growing up in and around Colchester, coming into town, fantastic site. The Roman remains, Norman remains, Civil War remains, everything. But when it comes down to being a tourist attraction town, we fail. And we've failed for an awful number of years. We've uncovered an awful lot in the 70s and 80s, covered it all up. We built the Southway through, allegedly for archaeological remains, just for cars to get around quicker. Yeah, great, but it hasn't really achieved much. Now, I suppose in hindsight, those developers or people on the planning committee in the 70s will probably look back and say, well, didn't really do a good job there. If you look at how we treat Roman remains across from the road from us, we have a Roman mosaic under the alleyway there. And what have we done? Covered it up. Oh, that's just absolute madness. You can see something that's been there built 2,000 years ago. Much better, well, some of the houses have been built today. I can assure you, my brother's a bricklayer, and he loves the Romans. They knew how to build houses, walls, and Roman circuses. And here we have an archaeological discovery that is the envy, or should be the envy of every other town and city in this country. We've got something that nobody else has got. We all grew up, we saw that fantastic film, Ben-Hur. I mean, what more can there be? A better film, massive film in the day, huge amount of money to make, people in chariots roaring around, trying to attack each other, but the win was everything. And this took place in Colchester, up the road from here. And what do we do now as a tourist attraction? We take tourists up there to show them some grass and say, underneath here are the remains of the Roman circus. And somebody bright will say, well, why can't we see something? Where are they? Why can't we see? Oh, we discovered them, we dug them up and then we put dirt on them and covered them up again. But don't worry, we can take you to this little tiny place, which is our best asset, and tells people about this massive heritage site. And this application, great, it's about houses, but it should be about our history, and it should be about this discovery and how best to use it. Build houses alongside the tracks. Build it in a shape that surrounds Roman circus. People buying a flat overlooking a possible site that could possibly, with proper funding, and I hate to say it, but Brexit has done us no favours. We could have got money from Europe to do this. when I go to Ireland, they have built tourist attractions using European money out of nothing. And it's fantastic. Come back to Colchester, we're going to look at some graphs somewhere. Sometimes there was a Roman circus there. We need to do more, and this application needs to do more, really. And we need the houses, we need the proper houses, we all know that, but we also need to work round to where we are. And not only the Roman circus, we also have the old military buildings that should be there. We're still arguing about whether they're going to be demolished or why can't we make more of that. The garrison in this town is linked to Colchester for years. The Roman garrison was destroyed by Boadicea, and all the other garrisons that came and went. We had the bridge built across Row Edge, and we should have it now, built by the military for transport. All this is history, but where do you see it in this application for tonight? Where? And we have an awful lot that is wrong with the application. And I'll send my piece about Ben Hur, and I want to, when it's built, I want to go around in the chariot and maybe have a go at Jeremy over there. That'll be quite good. So we go through this application, and as in a housing application, and it's the affordable housing one. I've sat on the planning committee for a number of years, and we've had loads of arguments with developers over viability and about why they're not building affordable houses. We're sitting up the road from here at Flagstaff Road in the old clothing building where they made army boots for years. No affordable housing, they couldn't afford it. Poor soul. I remember being in the committee and playing my invisible violin at the poor old developer who can't make any money out of it. So yeah, we need it badly. We have so many people that needs housing and accommodation in there. But anyway, we'll crack on with this one. And Benji was right. It should be a no-car application, really, the way it's going. Butt Road car park is quite close. Got a good bus service down Butt Road. It's a close walk into the town and into the so-called bus station, which ain't a bus station, but don't get me started on that one. It's a place where you pick up a bus amongst all the congregation, but the railway station is there. Yeah, it's great for that, walking around. Visitor parking, will they park in Butt Road car park and pay to go and visit their grandchildren, aunts and uncles? Probably not. They'll look for a place around the area first before they dump it on a verge somewhere, probably on top of the Roman circus, thinking they're a chariot, and I'm okay to park here in their 4x4 Jeeps and whatever else. There are safety concerns around the school, and yeah, so if it was a no car application, that would resolve that one for good. Overlooking of the flats. Now the flats concern me. I haven't seen anywhere in the application about the safety of the flats and whether we've taken on board the Grenfell disaster. How many more lessons do we have to learn over the years that we need to look at things like that, and the fact that their recommendations should be put in place. Councillor Julie Young years ago wanted sprinklers brought in as our policy that goes in flats as a safety measure for people. It's no good saying that, oh, and there'll be another viability issue. We can't afford to do it. Well, then don't come here and build it. Go off somewhere else. We want an application that fits what's right for Colchester, not what's right for a developer, because they're only in it to make money. They build their stuff, they sell their houses, they move on. They hand over all the maintenance to a management company we all know are not great. We all chase up issues around all areas, and it's not good for that. So there is a couple of issues, and there are a couple of pieces in the document. In the synopsis, it says key issues of an application. On an application, 2.2 says, will it have an impact on heritage? Yes, it does have an impact on heritage. The Roman circus site the military buildings, and even Abbey Gate, which is another example of we've got an Abbey Gate and we've got a massive tennis courts and everything else built on the sites around it. 2.3 says, benefits of the scheme, will they outweigh any adverse impacts identified? Dare I, I'm repeating myself. A sacred ancient monument is a heritage site, is somewhere an asset which will have an adverse effect on everything. This application goes over some of it, and it should work alongside it. Should be pulled back further. It should be at the centre of a development, and I would support that. But I cannot support this application tonight, mainly of all those issues, and we should refuse it on the grounds of no affordable housing. The developer, he didn't come in this blindsided. He knew that the site was polluted. They knew they were going to have some trouble here and there. But they knew about the viability get-out clause of every developer in this country, thanks to a poor planning decision by whoever, and allow them to do that. It shouldn't be the council building at any cost. It should be what's best for Colchester, and this is not best for Colchester. So, thank you, Chair. I should now keep quiet.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to take a few more speakers before I ask the officers to respond. Can I ask Councillor Arnold?
Thank you, Chair. And thank you, Councillor Lilly. I would love to take you around in a chariot on that. Because one thing I am is an equestrian lady, and the horse block was particularly interesting to me. It's a Grade 2 listed building. I looked at the designs. That design doesn't look anything like a stable. Not any stable I've ever kept any horse in. It's such a unique equine piece of history. It looks like it's glassed on the front there, no stable doors. That would be an utter shame to lose such a unique piece of history. Go on to the Roman circus. Yeah, I think Councillor Lilly has passed it all. So it's a Grade 2 listed building, and from what I've gathered from that, to keep it in as original format. So I just don't feel the plans that they look anything like a stable.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. We'll go on to Councillor Gocha.
Thank you, Chair. First of all, I'd like to thank the planning team for all the work they've done on this. It's obvious that quite a very large amount of work has gone into this, so thank you very much. I'd just like to raise a few issues I have. First and foremost, this issue of the school and the highway safety issue, which is a material planning consideration. I understand that the school is split into two sites, and there's a site near St John's Green, and there's a site further down near Abbeyfields, and that the Flagstaff Road is a safe route that is used by children to communicate or travel between the two sites. And the access to this development is, by the looks of it, through that area, through Flagstaff. With the best will in the world, I know the site is sustainable in terms of its walking distance from the town centre, but we all know the reality that people will have their cars. I mean, people I work with drive to work from a very short distance away from my place of work. So I know the reality on the ground, and I can't see how there will not be more traffic. So has a full impact assessment been carried out on how the safe route between those two sites for those children, I believe are very young children, will be affected by the increased traffic flow that will inevitably follow? That's the first question. In terms of some of the statements that have been made tonight, Councillor Cox's statement cited a number of references to planning policy that I wasn't able to note all the numbers down, but there was a number of references, about three at least references to planning policy that this development seems not to comply with. Can we have some feedback on all of Councillor Cox's references that were cited, please? I don't see how another material planning consideration, of course, is heritage sites and the effect on archaeology and heritage sites. And I cannot, looking at the map, see how the proposed development enhances the Roman circus very much at all. It's on the periphery of the circus site, and part of it is kind of creating a fragmented boundary, bit of a boundary. It doesn't do anything to reveal the whole of the circus site, so I don't see how it adds anything significant to a heritage site. And there's been a number of issues, a number of people have raised tonight the importance of this site nationally and internationally. And what we are proposing is something that potentially could detract from the site if it kind of just basically highlights one part of the boundary. That's it. I don't see how it adds anything to the Roman circus wider layout or site. Obviously, people have talked about a missed opportunity, but my concern is that it actually might even detract from the site, which is a concern, a material planning concern. I suppose the big issue I have is the issue of affordable housing. And it's been said that obviously there are caveats within section 2 of the local plan. So can I ask first of all exactly, it was said the other night but I've forgotten, exactly how many affordable homes are being proposed on site, and the alternative housing provision, what is it, and will it provide the 7.4%? That's the 7.4% of the site, 30% has been mentioned. Exactly what is this alternative housing provision that's being proposed? Because it seems to me that the proposal might comply with the letter of some of the caveats in the local plan, but it goes against the whole spirit of the section of the local plan. It seems to me to be a massive deficiency in the application. In terms of the flats, can you tell me what the percentage is? I'm hoping 100%, but can you tell me the percentage of those flats and the houses, I suppose, that are fully accessible to disabled people? What's the disability access provision of the whole development? That would be useful to know. Overall, my big concern is obviously the issue of the heritage site, and I just don't see how this complies with an enhancement of a heritage site that has international importance. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Goetcher. I call Councillor Hagan.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to everyone that's taken part this evening. It's very good of you to contribute and help us make an informed decision. Now, there is a couple of questions that I do have for officers, and I'll come to those in a second, but I had to quickly Google how many Roman circuses there are in the world, and the first result was there are many Roman circuses around the world, including well-preserved examples. And the only known Roman circus in the United Kingdom, Colchester Roman Circus, the only one in the UK, discovered in 2004. This development doesn't really do this statement justice whatsoever. And I think, you know, the City Council need to take this away, and I think they need to think exactly what Colchester is going to be in the future. Because once you put houses on it, you can't easily come along and remove them. And I disagree with Nadine's comments there that it's impossible to make this site much more than it is. Anything is possible, especially when you throw money at it. You can sort things out. A bit like the developer's done, they've thrown money at it and they've got the site. There is a question I do want to come back to officers on. It's a serious question, actually something Nadine did bring up in the conversation. There could be a possible conflict because Colchester City Council has put a bid in for that land. I just want clarification that we are okay with that we can make that informed decision this evening about the way forward. And I think that should be answered before we ask any more questions. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Hagan. Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. I want to say, first of all, thank you, Nadine, because I know you've done an amazing amount of work on this, but I think you're coming at it from a planner's perspective. And although we are a planning committee this evening, I think we also have to have a wider view of what's happening here. I first came to Colchester in 1980. There was a site across the road from here that was being developed. It ultimately became Culver Precinct. There was an archaeological dig that went on there for about a year, at which I volunteered. And I rather hoped, with all the stuff that I saw in that hole, that some of it would have been preserved and it would have been a focal point, a town square for Colchester, that tourists would have flocked to, that locals would have seen as a site of interest and a place and a space for them. That didn't happen. The great and the good of this council at the time decided to allow a planning application whereby Culver Precinct came into existence, and all of that was dug under so that they could create the garages that led to the stores in Culver Precinct. I don't want to see that happen again. And I think that this site and everything around it is of such significant importance that we need to do as a planning committee what we can to protect not only the Roman circus, but what's around it. Because I listened carefully to the contributions, and some very good contributions on both sides that we've had this evening. The archaeologist working with the developers suggested that some of the trench work that they've done inside the site has already indicated that there are other archaeological finds of interest. Now, if we go ahead and build on this site, again, that will all be dug up. We'll find the odd thing that will go into the museum, and the rest of it will disappear forever. I've been to Circus Maximus in Rome, and if you have been to Circus Maximus in Rome, it is incredible. You stand at one end of that and you're transported back 2,000 years and just think, wow, what was happening here? What was going on? And you get a sense of perspective by being there. And I mean, we have a word in our language, vandal. And that comes from a civilization in Germany, the Vandals. They sacked Rome, but what they didn't do was destroy all the buildings in Rome. They took Rome over for a few years, but they didn't destroy Rome because they recognized how important everything that was there was to a civilization. And I think we need to take account of that. I'm going to now come to some of my questions. So I know there have been comments about the local plan and housing affordability. And I've taken the opportunity just to review. And I have to say I'm disappointed that our local plan actually doesn't commit empirically to 30% affordable housing. It does have a let out, which is really disappointing to me, because I did, because I've believed what people have said to me without going and actually looking at this, that we had a commitment to 30% affordable housing for every development, apart from the rural areas where there's is it less than 10? I can't remember now, less than 6. So that concerns me, because I thought we had that as a commitment. But I believe that most councillors, if not all councillors, believe that that was a commitment that we had. So that's something I'd like us to feed back to the local plan committee. Viability, the question I have for our officers is, I think, Nadine, and I'll stand corrected if I'm misquoting, that you suggested that the price that's paid for a site doesn't come into the viability equation. So my question really then is, what comes into the viability equation? Because if it's not the price of the land as well as the price of development, how can that be? So the other thing I wanted to say as well about the price of that site, and I hear what Councillor Hagan has said already, and I think we probably do need an answer to that. But I would suggest that in English law we have something called caveat emptor, right, which is buyer beware. So the developers of this site knew from day one what they were getting into. I'm just having a look for the other question that I had. Yeah, the quality of the design, and in keeping with the historical importance and significance of this site, as has already been identified, the only circus in Britain, probably the only circus, or the only one that's been identified in Northern Europe. And when I look at two cities that I know very well, and I always compare and contrast what we do with our heritage in Colchester with those, Chester and York. Tourists flock to those two cities, yet they do not have anywhere near the heritage that we have in Colchester. We have 2,000 years plus of heritage. York has just over 1,000 years of heritage, because it really didn't become anything until the Vikings started settling there. And Chester, if you've ever been to Chester, it has great walls. I lived in Chester for 1.5 years and worked there as well. I used to run around the walls, and it was pointed out to me by a local, and I checked this myself, that the walls of Chester, believe it or not, were built on the foundations of some existing medieval walls, but in fact they are Victorian. They are not medieval walls. But what they have done is protected and projected their heritage by doing that. And I say tourists from all over the world flock to both of those cities. They bypass Colchester because they go up to Cambridge. We have an opportunity here to protect something that is of international significance. And I think we should do that. And I come back then to Councillor Gocher's point about heritage and the importance of heritage in terms of making a decision this evening. So I'd just like some advice and guidance from our officers about whether or not heritage is a significant issue when it comes to planning matters, and whether or not we can take consideration of that. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. Now, to those that are waiting to speak, I had hoped to get you all in before we went to second round of questions, but there's been, I wondered whether the clerk could ask the hall keepers to try to speak again, and if there's a public nuisance, consider the appropriate authorities. Thank you. So I wanted to try and get you all in before we went to questions. I'm making a note of what you're asking, so I will make sure they do get responded. However, there's been a lot of questions, so so to those waiting to speak, I hope you will accept that I'm asking the officers to come back on the existing questions first. Over to you.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to start with the heritage aspect because I think there's a slight misunderstanding here of the Roman circus and what it is and how it can be enhanced. So I would like to show you this slide again. This is an aerial view of the site at the moment. I'm going to do this. What's within the red cloud is the Roman circus, the track. You can see on the right-hand side, this has been demarcated as part of the previous scheme. So this is a footpath on the lines of where the track was. And this is to show, because all the archaeological remains from the Roman circus are below ground. This shows what was there. We have an opportunity, as part of this application, to reveal what was on the application site. You need to bear in mind, we can only control the land that forms part of the application site. We've got no control of the land outside of the ownership of the applicant, which includes all of the land down here, all of this, and this triangle here. We only have control of this piece of land here. And as you can see, if you were to take this line all the way across here and back to where this is already lined up, where my cursor goes now, there are buildings. There are buildings of the Roman circus. You can't see it. By demolishing these buildings and presenting the Roman circus and building that track as shown in this picture here, which is within the application site, we are enhancing the Roman circus and the historic environment just by doing that, because we are trying to show what there was. This is a public open space, open to the public. This will be a footpath. These little dots here, which you may or may not see, these are going to be public art boards where there is going to be information about the Roman circus. So these are all enhancements and providing history about and just reflecting on what was there and just to show what it was. It's open to the public. That there is so much public benefit out of this, and as stated and as it can be seen here, it is covered by buildings at the moment. So we are not destroying anything, we are destroying more or less, not modern, but recent buildings which detract from the appearance of the conservation area and other heritage assets, which block the Roman circus from being enjoyed by the public, from even being seen. So there is a clear enhancement here. I hope this kind of clarifies some of the comments that were made. I'll stop sharing and go through other comments. Oh, there we go. Okay, so I'll start by Councillor Lilly. You state that we must do better. There is no indication of how we do better. We've got something that nobody has, yes, and we are showing it, we're revealing it. Something that can't be seen at the moment will be shown. There will be enhancements to the visitor centre. We have secured money or works from the developer to Roman Circus House, which houses the visitor centre. There will be an extension to the northeastern face of Roman Circus House, which faces the application site. to transform the appearance of the premises when viewed from the site, to make it more appealing, because it's not very nice at the moment, the way it looks. There will be visitor toilets, there will be accessible toilets. It will improve the accessibility of that site. It will improve the offer they can provide from that service. It is hoped that this work will enable people to walk in, to go to that visitor centre, it will be up to a more modern standard, and that is hoped to increase the enhancement from the visitor centre. As previously set out, there's an outreach programme for the archaeological investigation that local schools can go to, the public can go to. These are all benefits in terms of tourism and the local area. The build form, as has been shown on the plan, has been designed that the closest buildings to the Roman Circus, which should have shown again, the Roman Circus, the scheduled ancient monument, is the southern part of the site. It's not the entire site. It's the area that is going to be used for public open space. There will be no built form on the scheduled ancient monument. Buildings have been aligned to demarcate, so that where the buffer zone ends, that's where the 3-storey buildings will be, to mark the presence of built form where it may have been before. So the layout has been designed in a way to enhance that appearance and the experience of that Roman Circus, in conjunction with advice from Historic England, who was happy in that aspect. The parking strategy includes visitor parking, and again, as I said, there will be parking permit schemes where residents can apply for a parking permit and hand that to the visitors. The surrounding area is again parking permit. There's no legal way for visitors or residents to park in the surrounding streets without the risk of getting a fine. Private sector housing have their own legislation. The houses will have to meet building regulations. Private sector housing's comment normally goes straight to the applicant because they are outside of the remit of planning. So where they have an issue, that is for the developer to address outside of the planning process. Benefits of the scheme, where I believe it was mentioned that the scheme would detract or would not enhance the heritage. At the moment, the site detracts from the value of the site, of the conservation area and the Roman Circus. The benefits include restoring the folly wall, bringing the 2 heritage assets back into use, open the circus, remove structures, bring the whole site back into use. It's vacant, it's a liability, there is public, there is antisocial behaviour, there is everything, and we can learn from the archaeology on the site. The archaeology itself, they have found probably more than they expected, which is incredible. If there's anything that is worth showing, that will go to the museum. However, it is agreed that archaeology is best preserved in situ. So leaving an object in the ground may be the best course of action to preserve it and keep the information for the future. So not everything needs to be dug up. We just have to make sure that it's not affected by built form, by foundations. I do apologise, I missed a point you made, Councillor Arnold. I'm not quite sure which building you refer to. Was it a store?
No, the horse hospital.
The infirmary stables?
Yeah, it is a Grade 2 listed building, and having glass doors on what's supposed to be a stable doesn't really fit with what it originally was.
Sorry, I'll take that. I mean, with that building, we've just retained the building in its entirety. The doors aren't there for the most part, and it needs some openings to let natural light in. So the easiest way to retain as much of it as possible is to use those openings for glazing and then find a viable use for it. Otherwise, you've got to punch through the walls and remove some of that historic fabric.
So may I?
Does that make sense? So I know it doesn't look like a stables because there's not the half and half doors sort of thing, but those doors aren't there. They are just openings at the moment. And if you just enclose those openings, there'll be no natural light in that building.
So may I add something?
Thank you. Rather than give Councillor Arnold a chance to come back, we'll take your advice as it is. And Irene, the Historical Buildings Officer, wishes to speak.
Yes, thank you very much, committee. I would like to add a clarification about the cable block. Now that it's listed, the works to the building need to be covered by listed building consent. So there's going to be an additional application anyway to cover the works, and it's going to be a condition as well in proposed for the decision, because until now we weren't very sure about the status of the building until very recently, and this can facilitate the negotiations for the exact, the precise details for the works for its conversion. So this is going to be covered by a condition, and then a listed building consent application needs to be made as well, which is going to give us extra control about the precise details of its conversion, its repair. Hope that helps a bit.
Thank you. If you'd like to carry on, Nadine.
Thank you. The application, because of its sustainable location, has been supported by a transport statement, not a transport assessment, as required by the Highway Authority. Along Flagstaff Road, where the access is into the site, there is a pedestrian priority. So the plans have been submitted which show it's called a Copenhagen style access, where pedestrians and cyclists have priority over vehicles, and that is marked on the floor. So there will be traffic, almost like traffic calming measures to ensure there's pedestrian priority. Again, there was probably a little small misunderstanding of how the scheme enhances the Roman circus, and it was talked about the fragmented boundary. I think I've answered that we've only got control over what's in the application side. We can't control what will happen on other pieces of land. But for this site, showing where the Roman circus was will be an enhancement. I have got a note here about affordable housing and the mix. But I forgot what that was, apologies. Affordable housing. I'll come back to that. The 5% of the affordable housing provision, so 5% of the units of the affordable housing provision need to be accessible. From what is, I remember now. From what is proposed, 1 unit needs to be for accessible for disabled people. That is the case, but all house types, all units are capable of being made accessible in the future, should there be a requirement for it. I believe the affordable housing was a clarification on what it is. So we've got option A, which includes 10 units, 10 affordable housing units, made up of 8 3-bed units and 2 4-bed units, and option B being the 8 3-bed units, 2 4-bed units, and 5 2-bed units. So whilst this is an under provision, this is where there is a critical need in the area, and I do have some statistics here where within the area where the application is in, I've been told that there are 36 people on the housing register, with 19 of them requesting family homes. 12 of those 19 were requesting 3 and 4-bed homes. So whilst it's a small number of affordable housing, it does address where there is the most need. For 3 and 4 beds, there is also an incredibly long waiting time at the moment. For 3 beds, there is, for those in band A, which is a critical need, there's 9.7 months waiting, and those in band B, there's 33.5 months waiting list, and for 4 beds, it's 6.9 for those in band A and 40 months for those in band B. A and B bands are those in the most critical need of affordable housing. So it does address the housing crisis that we're in.
Yeah, you've got a number of questions on viability, if you could answer those.
Firstly, the council has a duty to make a decision on an application. We have to determine this application. It has been brought before us, and we have to assess it against the development framework. So yes, we can make a decision. Because this application is, where the conflict has come from is in terms of potential, an opinion on the site, on the proposal, rather than now, as in making a decision. Because the site has been sold to someone else, the council has not had any input in any of these proposals. It was before that there was an interest, clear cut. We made a bid, we didn't get it, the site was sold, this application has been put before the council, we have a statutory duty to make a decision. What comes into viability is it's called a benchmark land value, and that is what the site is worth. And then what will be taken into consideration, and please accept that I am not a viability expert, I'm a planning officer, but we then need to take into account costs. And those costs are build costs, any abnormal costs, which unfortunately we've had with archaeology and remediation, because as much as it was expected, they're worse than what could be expected. So there's a number of costs that come into play here. There is the developer profit as well, but that in itself, what has been made in terms of profit here is not up to industry standard. So I think we probably deviate a little bit, which is, I think we need to know that the price that was paid does not come into play. There's costs and what the site is worth. That is what the site is worth, is what will be the test with the costs. I haven't explained myself well, sorry. But
Is there anything Karen wants to add on that?
Yes, if I can find the right. I was too busy reading about brownfield passports.
Okay, would you rather we get back to you?
Yes, please.
No problem. So, Nadine, there was also a question about alternative provision for housing. What is it?
okay, so the alternative provision for housing that is set out in Policy DM8, if I understand this correctly, what is proposed in terms of affordable housing is the alternative provision. So the 30% will be what the policy requests, but the alternative provision is, as set out in the report, I believe the figure is 7.9% affordable housing. So instead of the 30%, we've got the 7.9%. Or if we go with option A, the 5% affordable housing provision.
Thank you. And there was a question on quality of design and the importance of the site.
Well, as I said before, you're looking at the context around the site as much. I'm not sure what context you draw from the Roman Circus itself. We have lined the building line up as required by the SPD and Historic England. And then we've looked at the wider context in terms of, like I say, the consistency of Victorian terracing and the details to some of the former garrison buildings that have been applied to other developments in the area as well. And we feel that the proposal delivers that acceptable standard of design as a result of taking into account that context.
Thank you for that. And could you feedback on Councillor Cox's reference to policy?
The reference I could find, and we have been sent a statement, were in relation to the development brief, one of which was the indicative site layout. I looked for something else, so I lost it. If I could just have a minute.
Yeah, Karen, did you want to come back on your piece?
Yeah,
on
sure.
Finding what she wants?
I think Councillor Cox referred to the development brief being a supplementary planning document. Certainly mentioned, but what it wasn't clear on is how it deviates from that supplementary planning document, whereas Nadine produced in the amendment sheet a table of how it accords with that development brief. So I think we're quite clear that the balance weighs heavily in accordance with the development brief. The other policy referred to is the Roman Circus Management Plan. I didn't find reference to any other policies. The Roman Circus Management Plan, I just got up to understand. Nadine certainly references it in the officer's report, and it's referenced in the supplementary planning document as well, but it's a slightly different piece of work than the development brief itself, which is about how the site will be developed.
Thank you. Yes, in the submission it refers to layout set out in the ASDB and reinforced by the ASDB paragraph 4.23. Nadine.
That is the indicative site layout. I have addressed that earlier, and I've actually read out what the development brief says, stating that it's indicative and that any future proposal may deviate from that.
Thank you. And there was a question from Councillor Hagan. If you could clarify as to if the council putting a bid compromises the committee in taking a decision.
Yeah, again, I think Nadine's touched on this, but we're the local planning authority and we can determine planning applications even if we were to be the landowner, so there's no problem in us issuing a decision on this application. Shall I just say a bit about viability as well then? Development appraisals are a residual method of valuation, which is a valuation or appraisal based on deduction of development costs from the anticipated proceeds. And it is anticipated because I think Councillor Pearson said the buyer beware, but the buyer's not always aware. It applies whether you're buying a car or you're buying a site, doesn't it? You never quite know what's under the bonnet. But, there's certainly sites in the city centre where I'm aware the archaeology, once work has properly started, has been £1 million more than anticipated. So, there are unknowns that we do have to reflect. But based on the residual, i.e. what's left after that subtraction, is usually either the development profit or the land value. And that method of valuation is appropriate for development land and for refurbishment opportunities in general. That's the approach which is normally adopted for this type of appraisal.
Thank you. And for accuracy, in answer to Councillor Pearson's point, 9th century York was smaller than the Roman Equilboricum, which was about 2,000 in population. So if we could go to the speakers that wanted to speak the first time before I start bringing people in a second. So we have Councillor Davison.
Thank you, Chairman. It's certainly a difficult decision to make. One thing I need to make clear, which I have done about a year ago, is that I am a normal member of the Civic Society, but I have no dealings with them, and it's a non-financial interest only. Thank you. Just picking up on Karen's last point about viability, can I just be clear as to when viability overtakes any policy delivery? Because it seems, what I've heard tonight, is that viability is the key factor. And I'm sorry, this is a very sensitive site, and I'm not particularly happy with it at the moment. So that's the first question. Smaller points. Parking. It's a town centre site with good access to the town centre and bus services at top of Mersey Road. I'd like to know why we've got so many parking sites on there. And more importantly, I believe a lot of them, the parking is away from the actual properties. So how are they going to achieve all those charging points? Well, I'd just be interested to know how they can achieve it. Also, I did notice the flats. I'd like to appeal for external letterboxes. It just gives people a more regular postal service. I agree with Councillor, sorry, can't remember, Gocher, on the traffic assessment. But actually, it's a statement, not an assessment. And as I visited the site with the officers this week, it was quite noticeable that both school sites and medical facilities are the other side of the circular road. They're going to be an increase twice a day at least, and probably all during the day because of the medical facilities at Abbeyfields. And I think that justifies a zebra crossing as a bare minimum. We need to be sure that youngsters in particular have a safe means of crossing that circular road. It's a very busy road. The affordable housing, we need 30%. That's the problem. And that's where the viability, priority seems to be wrong in my eyes, especially for a town centre site. We've heard from Councillor Corey that actually this site could accommodate a higher density and perhaps less parking. So we need to try and maximise the usage of this site. But when we say maximise, I did notice in 4.8 of the report that tree planting is going to be throughout the site, is the quote, throughout the site. How does that protect the Roman burial grounds? I don't understand. Removing the tree protection order from trees, 10 at least. Yes, they'll plant new ones, but sorry, the whole point, and especially in the illustration, you've got fully grown trees, and that's going to take 20 years as a bare minimum. So again, I don't understand, again, the priority of getting rid of some of the trees. Bear with me.
That's fine, we can embrace the silence, take your time.
I've got quite a few notes. Yes, Karen's already mentioned caveat emptor again, and I have to say, okay, inflation and everything else has gone on since they bought the site in 21, but it's been proven that it's unviable, and yet even by reducing the amount of housing to possibly 10 units or possibly less, 5% to 7%, it's still very marginally viable, and of course inflation still carries on, doesn't it? So I just wonder whether this is really the best scheme. Well, it isn't the best scheme that we could achieve for this site, and I've got a lot of concerns about it. I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Davison. I call Councillor Powling.
Thank you, Chair. Once again, the officers have put a lot of work into this, and it's very clear looking at this. We've got an internationally almost recognised, unique building that could be there for the city of Colchester. That I think we'd be better off almost trying to rebuild it, even in the sections, because it looks like the bit south that we don't own or control over. It looks like that's possibly the military's anyway, which come up, which means we've still got more control of what you set now. And the heritage is what will bring people to Colchester. You go to York or any city, you go to look at some of these old buildings, they're actually fascinating. But my question is on viability. I'm really struggling on this one. Being a contractor myself, if I was, for example, priced to wire those dwellings, and I gave the developer the cost of, say, £200,000 to wire them all, and then win the job and go to the developer, now I've won it, I'm sorry, I now need £300,000 to wire those dwellings. The developer would say to me, do it for what you priced it for, or don't do it at all. So I really am struggling on viability. Why is it? It appears that the developer has taken a risk. Now gone to us as a planning authority and said, well, you can't have what you want because I want to make my profit. I don't understand that part of the viability. Surely the risk is on them. Why is it that the community or the city of Colchester has to take the knock for a risk taken by someone that was clearly looking to make a profit, which is understandable. Every business is. That would be my question.
Thank you, Councillor Powling. Councillor Spindler.
Hello. Yeah, I had a few questions. Some of them have sort of been answered as well. I was going to go along the lines as well, that if I had a decorator come in to do something, that is the price, and that's that. We don't adjust it accordingly. Disabled parking needs to be close to a house that is disabled. Otherwise, you know, that's not going to help at all. Obviously got charging points. Walking bus with the school, I was very concerned about that. It's also the area where cyclists use. I still think there's going to be a problem with walking bus for kids backwards and forwards to school. However we say it's not going to be, it will be a problem. Management company is having a management company, which a lot of the estates do now. That's extra cost for those affordable houses. Those affordable houses are for people that haven't got a lot of money and need an affordable house. That will be charged more on top for management companies. And then it looks to me like there's a permit parking cost as well. I could be wrong about that. So that's more money for those people with affordable houses that they have to find more money for. I work out roughly 7% of affordable housing is about, I don't know, 10, 15 houses, when it possibly be 30%, which is around, say, 50, 60 houses. Would have been a more effective for those families that need homes. Pity there wasn't a bit of a Roman theme going in with the build. Viability, totally agree on that. Viability, no, sorry. It's not our problem if you misjudge your costs and should not come into it. You know, there is the cost of archaeological digging, there's the cost of contaminated soil, possibly asbestos, looking at the site's buildings. That's not our problem and should not be our problem. You've got red brick housing along Southway, that are Victorian terrace houses. It's nice to keep that in within it, but then you go on Flagstaff and that's Suffolk white bricks, so that needs to come into the keeping of it as well. And if you go to the Quadrido estate, it was a cheap build, and as you walk along each house, there are so many houses where letterboxes are missing because there were cheap letterboxes. The doors to the meters are missing or broken because it was cheap products that were used. I'm concerned whether, you know, the standard and the quality of the products that are being built are, you know, just going to look tacky in a few years' time. And it's a shame that they did not consider Butt Road car park. I understand that the council may lose a couple of parking spaces if they had used that way, but it just seems a shame that they couldn't have had more access from that side. So that was my main things that I was going to just bring to the table.
Thank you, Councillor Spindler. Now we're coming to the last speaker for the first round of speaking, and that is Councillor McCarthy.
Thank you very much, Chair. I actually have a proposal, so I don't know if you want to hear that out or
could we get answers to the questions
certainly
before we go?
Yeah.
Thank you. And bear in mind we are approaching 9 p.m. So, Nadine, if you could start to answer the questions.
Thank you. I think I'll start with the policy framework against which we have to assess this application. That's a local development plan. And the local development plan has allocated this site for housing. The site is able to accommodate between 171 and 304 units. We are at the lower end. There is the potential to have up to 304 units and associated car parking and vehicle movements on there, all of which have been found to be acceptable. So the impact of the scheme on the surrounding roads and the area in general has been accepted, and the principle of residential development on this site is acceptable, including transport. Viability, again, I will go through some of them. We have to review viability, we have to assess it, we can't just say I'm not doing it. If I do go back to the contractor and decorator scenario, I don't fully agree with what was said, because I think there's two types of contractors and decorators and how they work. You get those who come in with a fixed price and they take the hit if they have to take longer. You've got those who come in with a daily rate and you don't know how long it's going to take them to finish the job. So you don't know how much it's going to cost. You can say, I estimate 5 days. If it takes them 10, I think you just let them go after 5 days. So you have finished the project and you have to pay more. That's how all of this works. So to just say, no, this is it, don't accept anything else, is not in the spirit of how we should approach this viability argument. I also have to reiterate that in the section 106, were this application to be approved, there will be a review mechanism for viability. If viability improves throughout the construction of the scheme, they will have to provide more affordable homes. So we would secure a certain amount of affordable homes. If viability were to go up and they would make more money, they would have to repay that in the sense of additional affordable homes. The existing zebra crossing on Circular Road North, there is one, and that will need to be upgraded to a parallel crossing, which means that it is for pedestrians and cyclists. We have also heard that we are in a housing crisis. This site is allocated for residential development. It has been reviewed. There's a viability argument here. It has been independently reviewed by the council. We have found it to be unviable. We are looking at a scheme. We've got a scheme in front of us, and that is the scheme that we have to determine. That scheme provides 203 residential dwellings and either 10 or 15 affordable homes of a mix which is beneficial to the council. If this application were to be refused, we have nothing. We don't know what's going to happen. Are they going to appeal? Or if they go to appeal, they either get it with what's proposed or they don't. If they get it, then we've got that home secured. If they don't, I do not know how long this site will stay vacant. We are in a housing crisis and we've got 203 houses on the table, including affordable homes for which there is a need. Materials will be are already of a very high standard. That is part of the viability issue, because the site, were this not the area that it is, we wouldn't be talking about this in that much detail. The detail of the houses and the materials is of the highest quality, and the materials themselves will still be conditioned. If there's anything we want to change in terms of materials, we have the opportunity to do that as part of a condition. But what has been put before us is already of a very high standard, talking about letterboxes, meter boxes, things like that. All of that is expected to be to the highest standard, which has influenced the money, and therefore there's a viability argument, because costs, building costs, materials, they have increased because of what we're asking them to do on this site. Again, we need to look at the scheme that is before us. It has an access from Flagstaff Road, which complies with the development brief. To ask for an access through Butt Road on land the applicant does not control or own would be not within the limits of this application, and also would be contrary to the development brief. Planning is always dealing with matters which are competing. We always have these competing matters where if you address one matter, that might cause an impact on the next. So it's a balancing act that we have to do. In terms of trees, it means in order to provide the best scheme possible and housing demarcating the Roman circus, it unfortunately requires the removal of some trees. And that is offset by the planting of more trees, but not only that, by the reinstatement of the historic tree line along Flagstaff Road. So we're not just saying remove one, you put another one in, it is creating again a benefit in terms of the history of the site. And again, it's these competing factors, which is why in the planning balance, all the negatives are listed, all the positives are listed, and in the end, the positives outweigh the negatives. I would like at this point, because I don't want to just leave him hanging, I would like to bring Martin Mason in from the Highway Authority, because I think he can address some of your concerns in terms of highways.
Yeah, I did have Martin in mind, and this seems an opportune time to do it. So Martin, the floor is yours.
Hi there. Thank you, Chair. Good evening, members. Nadine has very
I
eloquently...
can't hear you very well, I'm afraid, and I've got the added luxury of having a hearing aid. So if you could project your voice, that would be helpful. Thank you.
Yeah, no worries. Can you hear me okay now?
I can. How about the rest of the committee? Yeah, okay, thank you.
Cool. Okay, thank you. Sorry about that. I was just saying that Nadine has very eloquently covered off most of the issues in regards access to the site and Flagstaff Road. But I would just build on what she said by perhaps reminding members of the former use of the site. And it had a lot of heavy vehicles associated with it using Flagstaff Road, which clearly would be, in losing those, a benefit to highway capacity and safety. Also, the site is in a great location in terms of transport and access to services, highly sustainable. So it's likely to generate far less traffic than a more traditional 200 dwellings on the edge of town, for example, on the edge of in a suburban area. The access arrangements for the site are being rationalised by the proposal. As Nadine touched on, the site access would actually have an at-grade crossing for pedestrians and cyclists, giving them priority over vehicles, which obviously is important in terms of MPPF and sustainable transport, active travel, etc. And also the zebra crossing would be enhanced to a parallel crossing on Circular Road North. And there are also a number of other active travel improvements being provided by the developer. So hopefully that helps, and I'm more than happy to help with any further highway and transport related questions.
Thank you, Martin. If you could answer the question about the proposal would be problematic to the walking routes, backwards and forwards from Skull, bearing in mind it starts at the extension at St John's School and goes down to St John's Green.
Well, the route actually will be enhanced by the development because, as I said, they're rationalising the existing access arrangements with something which is much more modern in terms of thinking, and at grade crossing at the site access, giving pedestrians and cyclists priority, improving the zebra crossing to a parallel crossing on Circular Road North. So actually the route is being significantly improved as part of the access arrangements for the site.
Thank you. Now it's 9 o'clock, folks. So at this point, I need to ask you, the committee, whether you'd like to continue the meeting or whether you'd like to adjourn it and any proposals voted on without discussion. And at that point, I would bring in Councillor McCarthy with his proposal. So to keep it simple, do you wish to continue the meeting? Can you just indicate by hands, please? Right, that's a majority to crack on. So we will crack on. So Nadine, could you answer Councillor Davison's point as to why there's so many parking spaces and these being away from properties, and how will parking electrical charging points be accommodated?
The parking spaces proposed are just the parking spaces proposed. So again, we are looking at a scheme that has been put to us. It is a reduced parking provision, but the scheme is also defined by a developer who's got experience in selling houses. They believe that some houses don't sell if they don't have parking. So this is the level of parking they feel is needed in order for them to be able to provide a successful scheme. That has been submitted to us. We have reviewed it. In terms of placemaking, it works. The land users work, the parking works with the rear parking courts. It's an acceptable scheme, which is why, even though we would encourage lower parking provision, we can't make them do that if that's not what they want. Again, we're looking at what has been submitted. The electric charging points, they don't, I'm not an expert, but I don't believe they have to be at the house. They will be.
Yeah, sorry, they have an upstand, so they wire it in under the ground and you'd have an upstand next to the parking space. So if there's a garden wall there, they'd attach it to the wall, but they'd all, be wired in from the off.
Thank you. So, Nadine, could you also answer parking costs and how that would be more of a burden on those within the affordable housing? Is that a planning issue, and is that something we have considered?
Yeah, so the parking provision is basically 1-for-1 on the site. Those spaces would be allocated to the units. So it would only be if people wanted an additional car, they could choose to have a permit parking on the road. That would, at the moment, be on other roads. It would depend if double yellow lines got put down or whether the streets within this scheme got put within that permit parking scheme. So there wouldn't be a cost for the one space per house. That would be on an allocated provision. There was also a comment about the disabled parking for the accessible units, and that on the plan, it's always the space that is closest to that unit. So it's the most convenient and accessible space to go with that unit.
Thank you. And Nadine, could you ask the simple but blunt question, which was, in terms of the scheme, is this the best we can do?
That is not something that the planning committee has to answer. We are here to look at the scheme that is before you. We are not looking at any unspecified alternative version of a potential future scheme. We are looking at the scheme that is before us, which has been assessed against planning policy, the development framework that we have, including the site-specific Abro site development brief, and it is your office's opinion that the scheme is acceptable.
Karen, you wish to speak.
Thank you, yes. The issue of what is the best scheme for the site was raised. What I've not heard is what is being suggested is a better scheme for this site. I've not heard that articulated tonight, and it would be useful to hear that. Robert also asked a question about viability and when does it overcome policy constraints. It's all in the planning balance, and the weight to be afforded to viability is very much afforded by the decision maker, which is this committee tonight. But I need to be clear that the National Planning Policy Framework and our own local plan does require us to take account of viability evidence. It's how much weight you afford to it is down to yourselves.
Okay, thank you. Right, it's 9:05. I need a 10-minute break. So I am suggesting that we break for 10 minutes, and when we come back, those that have indicated, which is 4 speakers, will be the final speakers, and we can then move to taking a decision. And I'll leave Councillor McCarthy to last because he wants to make a proposal. So we break for 10 minutes, if we can be back in that time, and Robert will give Right, everyone's back, so thank you for taking the opportunity to have a comfort break. And we will now proceed, and I will call the people that have indicated that want to speak, and that is 4 people. And first of all, I'd like to call Councillor Hagan.
Thank you, Chair. I just need some clarification, please, if I could ask our officers to just to sort of understand this better. So on the website, the Colchester Council website, the Affordable Housing Supplementary Planning document, it says that alternatives to be considered in exceptional circumstances. So the first question is, what makes this an exceptional circumstance? What's that deciding factor? How was that come to, and how have we come to that? That information doesn't seem to be, maybe it's there, maybe I've missed it. And the other question I've got on here, it says in the document 513, it says in these exceptional circumstances, the provision of affordable units elsewhere will only be acceptable where each of the following are met, and that's an alternative site or sites has been identified. I'd like to know what site or sites have been identified that would enable affordable housing provision that matches what would been provided on the original site, and the alternative sites can deliver the off-site provision in an appropriate timescale and in appropriate locality elsewhere within the administrative area of the city. Now, it also goes on to say the off-site affordable housing provision is deliverable prior to the on-site market development being completed. And it also goes on to say under, I think it was 514, that if it's not, so in circumstances where the council accepts the provision of affordable housing cannot be provided on site, an alternative site is not available or acceptable, the applicant will be required to pay a commuted sum, financial contribution to the council to spend to provide affordable housing elsewhere. And it goes on the table too to say that commuted sum equates to around £233,000. Now, if we look at the balance of between the 15 homes and the 60 homes that I'd worked out to be, that's quite a substantial amount of money. I'd like to know if and where there's an option that actually determines that amount of money is in a 106 agreement, so we can be absolutely assured if we can't put the affordable homes on this site under the policy that this council has gone out to consultation to the public with, but also that we've adopted, that actually we've got a backup plan that we can go to, potentially an option C there that needs to be looked at. I'd also, the parking spaces for houses. Parking is always an issue for me. I hear what Essex colleagues have said online about it all ticks all the boxes, but we know that there's issues around schools, especially in my ward. There's always issues around schools, and I'm sure other areas as well. I'd like to know that the schools are being fully informed with that, and actually there is a travel plan being progressed and in place ahead of any future development that is even started, or even at least prior to occupancy, should that go ahead. And I'd also go on to a point there that Nadine said relating to comments that Councillor Powling said relating to developers not quite knowing what might be coming up to creep, cost-wise. Well, actually, on the other side, you also say that actually they've got experience in selling houses, and therefore they know what the costs are. So it's either one way or the other. We can't have it both. So there's a bit of confusing information from my perspective, and I find it very difficult to make an informed decision without knowing that. But the important thing is here is those affordable homes. As a council, we put it out to the public to get the consultation. We went through serious amounts of officer time and money to deliver a local plan and the supplementary document that we've adopted. We may as well tear it up. If we're not going to stick to our rules, or if we carry on down the funnel, there's an out.
Councillor Hagan, can we be succinct, because time is
Well,
short.
with all due respect, Chair, this is vitally important, so I'd like to...
So if you could be vitally important and succinct, I would be
that's very nice. Yeah, thank you for your acknowledgement of my anxiety on this, and the fact that actually I think that this council needs to look at what we've adopted, and I'd like some answers on those other points, please, if you wouldn't mind. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Hagan. We go to Councillor Arnold.
Thank you, Chair. I've got a few clarification questions as well. we're talking about the protection order on the trees. How much is that a percentage of the protected trees are we going to lose? I mean, you're saying it's 10. What is that in an actual percentage? And can you just clarify that that this will remove the protected trees on Flagstaff Road, but then replace them exactly with new trees in the same area? Because that's what I thought you said. Also on the parking, on the development, you're saying about they can apply for on-street parking. I take that is only within that specific development. That would not be on the roads outside of this area. And also we're saying the viability, there's a huge question around the viability of this site. This is why we have lost, up to 45 homes that are affordable. But we're being guaranteed it's going to be to the highest standards, and I have real concerns if they're so worried about making a profit on this, how can they guarantee the highest standards? Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Arnold. We move to Councillor Pearson.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I like the little cloud diagram, Nadine, but we should be here for aspiration. The fact that the site is fragmented at the moment doesn't mean that we shouldn't aspire one day to have the whole of that site, or the vast majority of that site, under the control of the City Council as a World Heritage Site, I would suggest. You mentioned, or you suggested to the committee, that keeping things in the ground is sometimes a better way to preserve them. I would just draw your attention to paragraph 16.5.7, which says, in accordance with paragraph 211 of the framework, any permission granted should be the subject of a planning condition to record and advance understanding of the significance of any heritage asset before it is damaged or destroyed. So, what we're saying is that whatever may be found can be damaged or destroyed. And that is where I think with this site, I am really finding it extraordinarily difficult to support anything that might lead to that damage or destroy.
Thank you, Councillor Pearson. And the last speaker is Councillor Davison, who I understand, as part of his comments, wished to make a proposal, and Councillor McCarthy has agreed to give way to that.
Yep, thank you very much, Chairman. It's been a long evening, but some very good points made all through the evening debate. I think for me, the one learning curve that I've had today is that how important the local plan policies are. We've seen that actually they haven't stood the test of time, and that actually they need to be completely watertight, because it seems at the moment the officers with the best will in the world are having to put priorities to certain policies and not to others. Having said that, this council and the city are desperately short of affordable housing, desperately short. And I know that the developers suggesting a 5% or possibly 7% requirement, when actually we've got thousands of people waiting on the waiting list. This really goes against all policies that we've been talking about. For example, SP4, housing needs. This city needs affordable housing, and I don't believe that this application has got sufficient affordable housing to justify giving permission. We've also got DM16, which is the historic environment policy. There's no doubt about it that, as Councillor Pearson has just said, that the developer and the planners have tried their best to accommodate this national site. But actually, as Councillor Pearson said, aspiration is a great thing, and we should be striving for better standards. The land to the south of Circular Road, for example, is mostly up for sale, the arena site and others. We can do better. So I think, again, on this application, the DM16 really fails in protecting a significant international site.
Could I just ask, carry on speaking, but before you make your proposal, I would like to ask the officers to round up on the questions that have been asked first, and
Okay.
then we'll come back to your proposal. Have you got anything further you'd like to say before that?
Well, there are more details, but yeah, that's fine for now.
Sure?
Yes.
Okay. Right. Nadine, if you could round up on the questions that have been asked, and if Karen needs to come in or Benji to support you, by all means do. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe that the exceptional circumstances that are listed in the affordable housing SPD and the offsite contribution you are talking about, Councillor Hagan, is not quite what you think it is. So there may be instances where the council is of the opinion that on-site affordable housing may be inappropriate. So affordable housing as part of a scheme may be inappropriate because, and it says it in here, because there's a significant proportion of studio flats or bedsites which we don't want to give out as affordable housing. They can then buy affordable housing off-site. That still includes money. It's better to provide it on-site. The applicant can't provide it on-site for reasons we have delved into quite deeply, so they won't be able to provide it off-site either. So the off-site contribution is not something that should be considered as part of this application, because it will have a further, if we were to ask for additional off-site contribution, it would have an even bigger impact on the viability. So I don't think that's the right path to go down. There is a travel plan. They have submitted the travel plan as part of the application, but we have also conditioned one. So the scheme will be the subject of a travel plan. Parking again is one of these. I'm sure I could go around the room here and I would get so many different opinions. Someone wants car-free, someone wants policy-compliant parking spaces. We will not be able to agree on what is acceptable for this site. So we're looking at what we've got, and what we've got we believe is acceptable in this instance. If you had more parking, if you had policy-compliant parking, you'd have more vehicle movements, and then members might think, oh, there's a bigger impact on safety. So again, it's one of these competing matters. The archaeology condition is a very standard condition. We use that on all of the applications where we think there may be reasons to potentially find archaeological remains. By looking for them, you might accidentally do something to it. That's not the intention, but that's why you need to be careful in doing it. And then before anything can happen to it, that's when you record it. I believe there's a bit too much emphasis being given to that statement. It's a very standard condition. All of our application sites, even if it's a householder site, if there is reason to believe there may be archaeological remains on the site, that condition goes on in that form. So I don't think it wouldn't be damaged by looking. Well, by simply looking for it doesn't mean it's going to be damaged or destroyed, because otherwise we could build nothing in Colchester, quite frankly. And again, this proposal is not about profit. The reason for the high quality standard of material and detailing comes from the council. That wasn't part of the original application. We have asked for the standard to be raised in response of the site's specific sensitivities. So that has had an impact on the viability. And in terms of trees, it might just be better if I show you the plan. This drawing shows in green the trees that are to be retained, in red the trees that are going to be lost. All trees on this site are protected because they're located in a conservation area. The tree protection orders probably have been put on before it was designated a conservation area, but all trees are now protected. And while these trees are lost here to align developments to actually, some of them to reveal the circus, some of them to provide built development, it is this historic tree line that will be on this side of the road that will be reinstated. So they won't be replaced in the same location, they will be replaced in different locations. Thank you.
Thank you. So, sorry, I was doing some procedural matters whilst you was doing that. So, did you answer the, sorry, I'm having to read, Councillor Arnold's point about the trees that we're going to lose? You've covered that, thank you. Parking on street, yep. To the viability. And what about the, whilst it's accepted the site is fragmented, the aspiration that the council should one day be in control of all the land?
Again, aspirations are not something that we can consider. We have got a scheme and an application site in front of us. We cannot control any development outside of the red line. There is the site which will still form part of the fragmented Roman circus is not within the control of the council nor the applicant. There have been discussions within the council as to whether we would like to in the future take on the part of the Roman circus that is within this application site, but it's unlikely that we want to do that because of financial liabilities, and this council, members of this committee, should not consider the remainder of the site which is not within the control of the council. If it was council-owned land, we could look at doing something, but it's simply not possible to consider doing something on land which is not in the ownership of the council. I fully get the aspirations and we would all love to do it, but this should not factor in your decision. And I'll leave parking to Benji.
So the streets within the proposal would need to be adopted primarily by the Highway Authority, so it would be up to them to decide whether to put double yellows down, or if they didn't, then it would be up to the Parking Authority, us, to put the restriction on permits. And I suspect I think it's area B1 around there, isn't it? And it would be whether they tie it into that area or another area. So that would come after adoption, depending on what the Highway Authority thinks appropriate for the roads.
Can I just clarify the percentage?
Yep, can you come through the chair, please? Thank you.
Sorry, I didn't get the percentage of the trees that we're going to lose.
Okay, yep, if you could give the percentage, please. Thank you.
No, that's why I showed the plan. I didn't give a percentage because I'd have to count all the trees and I don't want to give the wrong number. The plan hopefully identified the trees to be lost and the trees to be retained. Visually, I hope it showed more trees to be retained and more trees to be planted. I couldn't give you a figure right now, I'm sorry.
Thank you. And Councillor Davison talked about the importance of local plan policy has not stood the test of time. Do you have a view on that?
You might expect that I would.
Yeah.
I think I would agree with that as well. I think the local plan has stood the test of time remarkably well, considering how long it took at examination stage. What I would say is there's been very few schemes which haven't complied with policies, all policies in the local plan, but we are constrained with wording of policies and all the other material considerations that we have to take into account as the officers report and we've discussed tonight. There's a balance to be taken, and that's the case every time an application is determined. But I consider the policies are still robust and suitable for decision making, albeit that we will be reviewing them over the next year or so. But for the time being, they remain fit for purpose and are up to date.
Yep. Thank you. And what about the Pacific that DM16 is failing?
I was actually looking at DM8 first because that was the first one that Robert mentioned, which is the affordable housing policy. And obviously that does seek, well, it actually says affordable housing should be, there's no demanding that 30% will be incorporated, should be provided within the sites. And that wording is specifically because that's the type of wording which we're required by inspectors to include. the policy does go on to say where for sites where an alternative level of affordable housing is proposed, so it acknowledges that there will be circumstances where this does arise. It will need to be supported by evidence in the form of a viability appraisal. In exceptional circumstances where high development costs undermine the viability of housing delivery, then an alternative affordable housing provision should be shown, which is what's indicated tonight. So, in theory, what you've got before you complies with that policy in terms of affordable housing. I'll move on to DM16 while someone else might want to cover something else.
Okay, yeah, Martin Mason, Councillor Hagan talked about the issue around schools and asked whether you had informed the schools of the travel plan and would this be in place prior to occupancy?
Yeah, so I've already covered off what the improvements are to Flagstaff Road, which will enhance the linkage between the two school campuses. And Nadine has mentioned that there's a requirement for a travel plan and also residential travel information packs as well.
Thank you. Karen, DM16.
Thank you. DM16 is concerned with the historic environment. Development that will lead to substantial harm or total loss of significance of a listed building, conservation area, historic park or garden, or important archaeological remains will only be permitted in exceptional circumstances where the harm or loss is necessary to achieve substantial public benefits that outweigh the harm or loss. Where development will lead to less than substantial harm, this should be weighed against the public benefits of the proposal. Now, the policy does say a lot more than that. I don't intend to read it all out. What it does say is that heritage impact assessments and or archaeological evaluations will be required. They've been submitted in respect of this site. They've been assessed by our archaeological advisor, our conservation advisor, and Historic England. So I'm not aware that there's any substantial harm been identified. Nadine will tell me if there's less than significant harm been identified with any of the heritage assets, but that's essentially what that policy is concerned with.
Nadine. That's fine, embrace the silence.
Could I potentially ask Irene to answer that question, please?
Yes, sorry, I'm
Yes, of course.
I'm just going to answer. Yes, thank you. Yes, in terms of DM16, policy DM16, so we identified that there's going to be some minor harm from the change of use of the site, which is going to was going to have now residential use, but overall the scheme secures some concrete benefits about heritage, the reuse and conservation of the listed building, of the telecommunications building, the artillery folly as well. So these are some concrete heritage benefits that have been identified for the site. And again, the policy sets out that if there is some minor less than substantial harm, this has to be weighed against the public benefits. So sorry.
Okay, thank you very much. So we go back to Councillor Davison, who wishes to make a proposal.
Thank you to the officers, because there's been an enormous amount of work over the years in trying to bring the most achievable plan. But as Karen has said twice tonight, on balance. And, you know, what are we losing? What opportunities are we missing by giving this permission? And the various policies I've mentioned, SB4, SB7, DM16 and 8, admittedly, they could be interpreted both ways. There is that loophole, and that's what forgive me, when I said about the local plan not being fit for purpose, that's what I meant was that the newer one, and you've explained it already, that actually the wording needs to be more watertight. But you're saying actually it can't be because the inspector wouldn't allow it. But I think that's the dilemma we've got here, that actually we want more housing for affordable housing, and actually we can't achieve it. We want to protect a very worldwide important historic site. This goes some way to helping with that, but actually we believe that we could do better. And I think on balance, I'd like to recommend that we refuse it for all those reasons, and thank the officers for trying their best.
Thank you. And just to remind members that it's not for the officers to help you find a refusal meeting, the refusal reasons. Now, the policies, the procedure of the meeting is clear. If a proposal is made to refuse or approve an application which is contrary to the recommendation of the report, which this is, the senior planning officer needs to be asked to clarify any implications of such a decision, and the chairman then needs to decide or invite the committee to vote on whether the implications are low or sufficient to invoke the deferral and recommendation overturn procedure drop. Agreement to invoking drop means that the item is then brought back to another meeting with a report setting out any additional information. Now, Councillor Pearson seems rather keen to want to come in. So before you do that, can I ask whether what you're going to say is going to add to what Councillor Davison had said, because time is getting away. It's 9:45.
Thank you, Chair. I hope it will. Our local plan has a section entitled Historic Environment, and in paragraph 7.86, and I quote, "There will be a presumption in favour of the physical preservation in situ of nationally important archaeological remains, whether scheduled or not. The more important the asset, the greater the weight will be for preservation in situ. In accordance with national legislation, preservation of remains may require the refusal of development that could be detrimental. That I would like to have included in Robert's reasons for refusal."
Yeah, thank you, Councillor Pearson. The planning officer, Nadine, wishes to ask a question. Are you asking it of Councillor Pearson? Okay, go ahead.
I think I'd like to understand a bit more about what you're saying. Are you now saying that we shouldn't enhance the Roman circus, we shouldn't present it? Do you want to leave the Roman circus where it is and you don't want to show it to the public?
No, but I will respond. I think that's irrelevant in terms of the decision this evening. What I said earlier was that the aspiration of this council should be to enhance that whole site. However we do that over the years for future generations of Colchestrians, this is such a significant site that we should be moving heaven and earth. We've spent millions on Jumbo, and what do we have from it? This is a site that's of much more significance than Jumbo. I know I'll probably get castigated by some people for that.
Councillor Pearson, have you answered Nadine's point?
I hope so.
Thank you. Right, so I will ask the senior planning officer to clarify any implications of refusing this decision.
The biggest implication really is that there's likely to be an appeal, probably a public inquiry, which is a substantial cost to the council. If the reasons for refusal are not robust, then there is also the potential for the applicant to seek costs from the council to cover their fees. And the other implication, as far as I see it, is the changing national policy picture. I heard from the Planning Minister himself this morning that the new NPPF is likely to be in, well, will be in place by the end of the year. That introduces a presumption in favour of the development of previously developed land within existing settlements. So with that on the horizon, plus the current consultation on brownfield passports, any appeal that would be heard would be in the context of that national picture as well. So that is something to also bear in mind.
Thank you, Karen. Councillor Davison, the clerk will ask you to clarify your proposal. Before he does so, I'd like to remind you that you should explain your reasons for the refusal using specific policies and references to the material planning considerations. So, clerk, if you could seek clarification.
Thank you, Chair. It's just to make sure that I have exactly down the wording that you wish to propose and then find a secretary accordingly. So I have at the moment that the application will be refused as the proposal does not accord with the local plan regarding affordable housing. Was that part of what you were intending to? And could you expand further if possible, please, Councillor?
Thank you. Could I just, Chairman, could I just answer Karen's point? Is that the NPPF we know will be changing, but you would like to think that a significant historic site like we're talking about would have an exemption. It's not just about housing numbers. I agree, most brownfield sites or redeveloping sites definitely need to be developed. We've been market leaders in brownfield sites for years. It's not that we don't want them, it's just in this particular case, this is of national support and worldwide importance, as you've heard. Sorry, thank you. The clerk needs to know that I mentioned 4 policies. SP4, which is meeting housing needs, and this definitely falls short of that. SP7, which is place shaping principles, which again, we're talking about a worldwide heritage site. We believe we could do better. And also DM8, which I know Karen has tried to explain, but actually, you know, again, affordable housing is what we need as a council. We are short, desperately short of it. And DM16 is the historic environment, which Councillor Pearson recently mentioned, that has an exception for worldwide heritage sites. Is that sufficient, Chairman?
Karen, do you wish to ask any further questions on let me get this right, on the specific reasons that Councillor Davis is proposing a refusal and the specific policies and references to the material planning considerations he's made?
Yes, could I ask Councillor Davidson, SP4, did you say? And SP7, I need to refer to those in particular. So
yes, well, forgive me, I've just got the list of policies here. SP4 is meeting housing needs. And
how is refusing this going to address meeting housing needs?
Because we will attempt to get higher affordable housing allocations on this site.
You won't by refusing it, will you? 4 affordable housing units is better than none if you refuse it, I guess.
It's a compromise, but I don't believe it's sufficient. No.
I'll just look up the policy.
Thank you. Yeah.
Yeah, if we could just, if we could all just indulge and allow, embrace the silence to allow Karen to look up the policy.
Yeah, I don't think SP4 is relevant because that simply sets out the annual housing target for Colchester, i.e. 920 units a year. So I don't think that's relevant to here. It doesn't talk about tenure or anything like that, or individual sites.
Thank you, Karen. I would just say that in the report, it does mention the existing 920 requirement. Of course, we know that's going up to 1,280, is it, I think, in 90, thank you, in future, which will be even harder to achieve. And I appreciate that's the timing's an issue, but actually, there's more and more pressure in this council to deliver those sort of numbers within 18 months of now.
That policy is not relevant to this decision you're making tonight. Okay, thank you. Thank you. We'll now turn to SP7 and have a look at that. There is reference in there to historic assets, yeah, and protect and enhance, so I can see that that one could be considered relevant.
Thank you all. If we could just allow the officers time to speak to each other.
I think we probably do need to defer so that we can fully explain the risks of an alternative decision. I'm not generally in favour of deferring for the sake of deferring when a decision should be made, but in this instance I think it's probably for the best. What we can do is look at the possible reasons for refusal based on what you've said and using those policies.
That's very much appreciated, thank you, and we'll come back to committee, will it, Chairman?
Yeah, can I just ask Robert if he could just give a bit more detail on the drop procedure?
Thank you, Chair. So, as members will note on the last page of their committee pack, the drop procedure is included. On the right-hand side, we've gone through discussing the risks, as we've got so far. Under it, it allows that decision on whether to defer or a more detailed report is taken before the vote on the motion is one of the steps. Therein, power is invested in the chair alone or by a vote by the committee to defer the item so that a decision is taken to defer the item for more information on risks to be provided, where the item will then be the report and the risk assessment will be presented back to the committee as such, but there will, in that period, it will go away, come back, there will not be public speaking, it will be just presented to the committee as such like it is now.
Thank you. I therefore have the power as the chair as to whether I decide to drop or I decide to ask you to put that to the vote. I think the risks to the council are substantial, given the magnitude of, the development, and therefore I am invoking drop, and I will ask for a report on the risks to come back to this committee for us to further consider. Thank you. So, as far as I'm aware, that concludes the meeting, and thank you all for your patience tonight, and thank you all for attending. Thank you.